This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1646, Spotlight on SHAZAM! In the Golden Age, Part 3.
Laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek, uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is...
I'm Adam Murdo.
I'm Shane Kelly.
And I'm Chris Eberly.
Welcome to Comic Geek Speak, ladies and gentlemen. And this episode sees the resurrection and continuation of a series of spotlights begun a little over 2 years ago. Yeah, we're not the most consistent sometimes here at CGS, but we're industrious in spurts. And,
we're energetic.
Industrious in spurts.
And when we begin something, even if it takes us the better part of a decade, we do eventually get around to finishing it. Or try to. And so here we are to bring you the third episode of Comic Geek Speak devoted to Captain Marvel and his Marvel family, the wielders of the power of SHAZAM in the Golden Age. Beginning in the year 1946 and going as far as we can go. But first, let us give due to our sponsor for this episode, which will be the Collection Drawer Company, makers of the Drawer Box Easy Access Storage Solution. Check out their website at collectiondrawer.com, where you can learn all about their flagship product, the Drawer Box, which is a twist on the classic cardboard long box storage unit for comic book collecting. But the difference is, instead of having a lid on the top by which you can access your comics, there is a drawer that pulls out through the front. That way you can stack more long boxes on top of other long boxes and still be able to easily access the comics within without having to shift the pile of boxes all around, because you can just pull that drawer right out the front and there your comics are. It's a great labor and space saver for the serious and voluminous comic collector.
Voluminous.
And at collectiondrawer.com, you can also check out some of the accessories that the Collection Drawer Company has come up with for their drawer boxes, including the Box Locks anchors, which improve stability for the partially full boxes as they are stacked upon one another. It provides even better long-term stacking strength, and it keeps the boxes from tipping over when they are stacked. There are also the Box Sort Upright dividers, which prevent the contents of your drawer boxes from falling over when they're not completely full, prevents spine cracking, and it helps you organize the comics they're in by creating sections for different titles. And if you need to buy a good deal, like a large number of drawer boxes to house a large collection, they are happy to work with you and provide volume discounts. And they also offer drawer boxes in a variety of sizes and shapes for things other than comic books, such as magazines, action figures, LPs, sewing supplies, and so on. So go to collectiondrawer.com, check it out. Your collection will thank you for it.
And gentlemen, I just want to say, I'm sorry, Mert, go ahead. I cut you off. I apologize.
Oh, no, please.
Just, I haven't been in the studio now in nearly 3 months. It is, as always, a thrill.
It's been pretty close to that for me as
to
well.
Be here, to see both two of my nearest and dearest in the flesh, rather than through a Skype monitor, is heartwarming, to say the least.
My heart feels no less warm to see you here among us
pat,
again, Chris.
gentlemen.
And you, Shane, as well. I'm glad you were able to make it here tonight.
Yeah, I was looking forward to this.
Because the Marvel family must be together here.
That's right.
We started these episodes 2 years ago, and by golly, we're going to finish them together.
And I want to let listeners know that Merd's outline, I mean, we've talked about his legendary yellow legal pads on many occasions. This is typed.
We have.
This is typed. I mean, we got the full treatment here. The detail is magnificent, and he's holding up his yellow legal pad.
It's embarrassingly thorough.
Are those addendum notes?
Yes. Actually, I've got
Wait. Because the outline Shane and I have is
6 pages front and back?
4, 5,
Right.
6 type pages.
12 sides. Provided by producer Pants in absentia. So thank you for that contribution to tonight's proceedings, Brian Grisman.
Thanks a lot, Oshkosh. And
Oshkosh.
And then Merd has his. Oh, this is exciting.
Yep, I've got notes coming out of my ears over here. But yes, we are going to continue on with our unnecessarily detailed look at at the world's mightiest mortal in his era of origin.
Way to shoot down, Adam.
Trying to be self-effacing here. Maybe there's no excuse for taking this many parts and this many hours of audio to go through like a few years worth of comics. But in my defense, Captain Marvel did appear in a lot of stories in the Golden Age. I mean, he was very prolifically published by Fawcett Publications. There were like 800 different stories, I think, featuring the Big Red Cheese put out in the 40s and 50s. And so he appeared in more individual stories than Superman, I'd be willing to bet. For a while there, he was appearing in like 8 stories per month. Whew.
And in our previous installments, did go over the Monster Society of Evil, correct?
Yes.
That's right.
Yes,
okay. So people should check that out.
Legendary 25-chapter serial.
You did a magnificent overview of that.
Did they collect that in a trade?
There was back in I think it was in the 80s actually, in the days when collections of older material were not common. It wasn't even put out by DC. It was some kind of independent publisher.
Really?
Produced a collection of the Monster Society of Evil.
Do you have a copy of it?
I don't.
Okay.
Has it ever appeared in the DC Archive editions?
Not that I know of, because they didn't get very far
That's true,
into the Golden Age Shazam material before they just gave up on the Archive editions altogether. I think they did 3 Captain Marvels and 3 Shazams.
They did a Marvel family,
and
one
Shazam family, but that was only like a few stories.
See, I'm remiss. I keep forgetting that DC cannot use the Captain Marvel trademark on the covers of these stories.
If only. And nowadays they don't even seem to want to use it inside the covers, because these days Captain Marvel is actually called Shazam, and that's unless you're talking about Earth 5. That's
right.
Thank you, Grant Morrison, for keeping Captain Marvel alive somewhere in the
That was
multiverse.
magnificent. They have announced a Shazam film, have they not?
Yes.
And a Black Adam film.
Yes.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if those actually come
to fruition. Yeah.
But yeah, it's all kind of up in the air and fluid as far as Warner Brothers superhero projects these days. But yeah, The Rock is supposed to be connected to the Black Adam film.
Oh, I think that's a great choice.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, he's already been the Scorpion King, and the characters are somewhat similar.
And I don't know, people might rail me for this. I think he seems like he would be very nice and a lot of fun, very passionate about a great many things, to be kind to everybody. It seems like he does a lot of charitable, nice things for people. Videos that you see posted all the time on Facebook or YouTube, wherever. It just seems like a really good choice to play Captain Marvel. I mean, Black Adam.
Yep, I can see him playing that role right now.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Are we ready to...
We are ready.
Dig in here. Okay. Well, before we begin, let me... for the newer listener, or the listener who just happened to miss the first couple of parts of this series of Golden Age Shazam Spotlights, I urge you right now to just stop what you're doing, press stop, and if you have not already done so, go back and listen to episodes 1538 and 1540 of Comic Geek Speak from February 2015, because that is where we began our look at Captain Marvel in the Golden Age.
Stop what you're doing, because I'm about to ruin it.
Okay. You done with the hippin' and hoppin' over there?
I like that song.
So reference will be made to information provided in those spotlights, and I don't like to chew McCabbage twice. So go back and listen to those, and then come back and join us for part 3, where we begin with well, we're going to start with the very end of 1945 and then press on from there into 1946 and beyond to get as far as we can. The ultimate goal is to get to the end of 1953 with Captain Marvel, because that is when Fawcett Publications stopped publishing Captain Marvel altogether. Dead stop. All right, so it's December 1945, January 1946. The war has been over officially for a couple of months now, and peacetime is settling in on the United States. Happy days are here again. Servicemen are coming home in droves. People are cheering. And Fawcett Publications is enjoying an era of unprecedented prosperity. This is really the salad days for their company. Like this period, the second half of the Golden Age for Captain Marvel, like 1946 to 53. This is really like the rise and fall of the Fawcett Empire. This is where we go from the pinnacle of their post-war posterity to when superhero comics in general were becoming unprofitable, and the company just decided to call it quits altogether.
Now, Fawcett also published magazines, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, they were the publishers of Woman's Day magazine.
Get out. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, yep. There was a media empire beyond just the comics,
Wow.
and that continued on when the comics stopped. Yes, Fawcett continued to do things elsewhere. There was also something of theirs called Mechanics Illustrated, which had been published since the 20s.
I remember that.
Yeah, yep. There will be a reference made to that as we go along, in fact. Captain Marvel Comics always had house ads for Mechanics Illustrated, and there was even a Captain Marvel story or two related to it.
Huh.
So, Beginning then, a couple of notes about December 1945. First of all, Hoppy the Marvel Bunny. I know how you do love to raise that subject,
do.
Chris, and with good reason, because Hoppy is hilarious. He actually got his own ongoing comic in December of 1945. After having starred in Fawcett's Funny Animals for a number of years, Fawcett, it's just a sign of how confident Fawcett was in the popularity and the success of their characters, that they were willing to take a chance on giving a solo book to a super-powered funny animal. Now, granted, it lasted only 15 issues, so the confidence wasn't necessarily well-founded, but at least they tried it. And so for a while there, Hoppy appeared in both Fawcett's Funny Animals and his own book. And fun side fact here, Hoppy the Marvel Bunny, not necessarily as the Marvel Bunny, but Hoppy actually outlived the Marvel family.
Oh, I didn't know
in
that.
comics. Yeah, at the when Fawcett decided to throw in the towel as far as publishing comics, they sold a lot of their properties and licenses to Charlton Comics. And one of those properties was Hoppy. So for a while there into the 50s, Charlton was publishing Hoppy comics. They bought the Funny Animal title from Fawcett. They weren't allowed to call him Hoppy the Marvel Bunny, though, as per Fawcett's agreement with DC not to publish or allow anyone else to publish any of the Marvel family of characters. But they were allowed to continue to publish Hoppy stories, but they changed his name to Hoppy the Magic Bunny. They changed his magic word from Shazam to Alazam. They took the lightning bolt off his chest. I think they recolored his costume, and it was like blue in some stories and red in others.
But it was clearly Hoppy.
Yes, it was without a doubt the same Hoppy we've known. It's just he no longer has any connection to the power of Shazam. But so he actually did outlive the Marvel family into the 50s.
And we should remind our listeners that Charlton is a company that was, I think, out of Connecticut, if I remember correctly.
It certainly was, yes.
Yeah, that was around. I remember buying some Charlton comics when I was a kid in the 80s, for example.
wow.
Comics
I
like
didn't-
Fighting Army, Fighting Marines,
I
etc.
didn't realize they were that.
Yeah.
They lasted that long.
And they this is probably early 80s, and they were like sort of like one of the bargain basement companies of like comics. I think they also would print like sheet music and different things like that. But Charlton has a fascinating history. Like Dick Giordano was an editor there initially before he went to DC. Ditko did some work for them. Steve Skates. I'm forgetting who else, but
Roy Thomas,
Roy
his
Thomas,
first published
Son of
story.
Vulcan. That's right. So, they had, think of almost like the version of like the comic book equivalent of like B films, essentially. That was Charlton.
Is that the same Son of Vulcan that Scott Beatty would write years later in that miniseries that was out by DC?
Well, the same in name anyway,
Okay.
and the
Yeah,
same
because
in trademark.
DC eventually, got the quote action heroes that Charlton produced, like
Sure.
the Blue Beetle, for example.
Question.
The Question. They brought them all over to DC.
I didn't realize that included Son of Vulcan from
Yep.
Charlton.
He hasn't been used very much over the years. He showed up in the War of the Gods miniseries. And, yeah, so
Captain
it's-
Atom, Judo Master, so forth.
Now something that I always like to do, and this is just my own little neuroses in my head. I do it a lot listening to old time radio shows. 1945, my dad would have just turned 4 in December of 44. My mom would have just been born in May of 44. So I know my dad dabbled in comics when he was a youngster. But yeah, I always find it interesting to picture them young,
sure.
listening to radios, reading comics or whatever. So okay.
You think you read any Captain Marvels?
I know he read a lot of Superman. I don't know about Captain Marvel.
Well, that's okay too. We like
Yeah.
Superman,
Oh yeah,
but he is not the subject of this spotlight.
that's right.
All right. So also happening in December 1945, another sort of ancillary Marvel family member, in addition to Hoppy, got her own ongoing series for the first time, and that's Mary Marvel. December of 1945 saw Mary Marvel Comics #1. Finally got her own series. It took her a mere 3 years after her first appearance to get this spin-off underway. By contrast, Captain Marvel Jr. got a spin-off solo series of his own a mere 9 months after his first appearance. So Fawcett had to wait until they were at the peak of their confidence, when they really thought they were had come into their own, before they were going to risk publishing Mary Marvel in a solo series. But eventually they did. She'd been appearing in her own solo strip in WOW Comics for a good period of time. But in December of 45, she finally got her own solo series. And the first issue of that series saw Mary have her first one-on-one encounter with Dr. Sivana, archenemy of the Marvel family. And in a second story in that issue, we were introduced to a character who would become Mary's recurring nemesis, Georgia Sivana, Dr. Sivana's younger daughter. Now, he had an older daughter named Putia, who was sort of ongoing supporting character, semi, quasi, almost, not quite love interest for Captain Marvel. But Georgia, whereas Beautia and her brother Magnificus, who only appeared once in the Golden Age, they were Adonises. They were just physically attractive. They had all the traits that their father Sivana did not have, wizened, gnomish little guy that he was. Georgia, however, took after her father. She looked like Mary Catherine Gallagher in a Sivana mask. Okay. She had kind of a Catholic schoolgirl vibe going on. And she was determined to be the princess of the universe. And so she and Mary Marvel clashed repeatedly.
It's quite an aspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, many social media princesses of today probably share it. They wouldn't have expressed it in quite the same terms, and probably don't share George's aptitude for science either. But anyway, so Georgia Sivana, an important recurring villain for Mary and for the Marvel family in general, she first appeared in Mary Marvel #1. Yeah, so the Mary Marvel series would... See, unlike the series that starred Captain Marvel and Cap Jr., which lasted all the way to the end of the Fawcett superhero line in 1953, Mary's series, both in WoW Comics and her solo series, checked out somewhat early. In September of 47 is when her WoW comic strip ended. It was replaced by Ozzy and Babs, which was a teen humor feature, which managed to rip off both Archie and Blondie and Dagwood simultaneously. So, a sign of the changing trends there in the late 40s. And exactly 1 year after that, in late 1948, the Mary Marvel solo series ended with issue number 28. It was converted into Monty Hale Western, which mirrors a trend that was seen at DC at the end of the Golden Age, where a lot of the formerly superhero-dominated anthology series, like All-American Comics, were converted into Western comics starring cowboy characters.
All-Star Western, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yep, that was going on at Fawcett as well. So, signs of the changing times, and superheroes in general were falling out of favor, and even as the Marvel family remained strong at Fawcett, Mary did not. After the fall of 1948, the only place you could see Mary Marvel was in Marvel Family Comics. And in the final issue of her solo series, Uncle Marvel. Remember him, the lovable old fraud who was kind of a member of the Marvel family but had no powers. That was his final appearance of the Golden Age, too. He was kind of phased out at that point. But he had a good last hurrah. The Shazam gods took pity on him and let him have Shazam powers of his own for one whole day. So he was sent out on a high note.
Mert, who was the creative team working on the characters at this point?
Well, that's difficult to know, Chris.
Because they didn't get anybody credit, right?
Fawcett had a policy against that, actually. The only one who occasionally got his name on comics was C.C. Beck. He was actually credited for a while there as chief artist on all the Captain Marvel stories. And he did actually have a hand, at least in the creative process, of every Captain Marvel story produced. Sometimes he would rewrite a little bit of dialogue. Often he would redraw facial expressions. So he put his stamp of approval on just about every Captain Marvel story put out there. He was kind of the quality control man. And he was darn good at his job. He had the respect of every artist working at Fawcett. But yeah, as far as other people working on the character, I have a raw list here of writers and artists, which I will read at this point. There was Beck himself, of course, and his right-hand man, Pete Costanza. The two of them, in 1948, went out to New Jersey and established their own shop. Otto Binder's brother, Jack Binder, had a shop in Englewood, New Jersey.
That's right.
And that closed down at about that time, and just about all the artists working for him just went to the other side of town. It was to the same. Englewood is also where Beck set up his shop, and so they just went to work for him there. So Beck and Costanza was kind of his lieutenant, and he stayed out there in Englewood while Beck was doing work in New York mostly. Other artists were Ed Robbins, Al Fageley, Alex Coster, Ray Harford, Al McLean, the great Marcus D. Swayze, who created Mary Marvel, Dave Berg, Charles Sultan, Ken Bald, Chick Stone, and George Tuska.
I didn't realize Tuska was involved in the Marvel family.
Not in a very large way, but apparently he did turn in some.
Now, did Mac Raboy work on
Captain Marvel Jr.?
That's right, okay.
Yep, that was his character. But even he didn't stay with the character that long. He was a little frustrating to work with, apparently, because he had just too much of the artist's temperament, and he was his own worst critic. And he was always redrawing things, and it took him forever to finish drawing something. And he was always berating the writers for writing too much dialogue and forcing too much action into stories. He just wanted to paint beautiful landscapes. Eventually, Bud Thompson took over as the primary artist on the Captain Marvel Jr. stuff. As far as writers go, of course, Otto Binder, far and away the most prolific of the lot. But probably in second place was Bill Woolfolk, who wrote a lot of Captain Marvel Jr. stories, too. Rod Reed, who worked as both editor and writer at Fawcett at different times. Manly Wade Wellman, who was like a pulp writer who got into comics mainly for the money and eventually went on to turn evidence against Fawcett in the ongoing legal battle between Fawcett and DC. And a writer named Joe Millard, who was like the king of the 2-page text piece. Those little fillers they had to put into comics in those days to qualify for second-class postage. He bragged that he one time came back from a trip to Mexico flat broke and ripped out 8 of those text pieces in a day just to recoup the money he had lost on his trip. So those are some creators that were involved in Fawcett in the Golden Age working on the Marvel family. And speaking of the Marvel family as such, the third important thing to mention about December of 1945, one of the most important milestone comic books of the Golden Age of comics, Marvel Family #1, saw print. I'm not sure if they intended this originally to be an ongoing series. It might have just been like a one-off thing because several months passed between the publication of #1 and #2. But this first issue certainly had an impact, and its shockwaves are still being felt to this day. It's not the first time that Captain Marvel, Mary Marvel, and Captain Marvel Jr. ever appeared together in a story. I think the first time that happened was Mary's first appearance in Captain Marvel Adventures #18, exactly 3 years ago. In 1942. It is the beginning of their continual association as a group. It's the start of their regular grouping because previously they just all had their solo adventures and rarely crossed over into each other's stories. But here we had the 3 of them and even Uncle Marvel thrown in for good measure appearing together in this issue. And it's a key thing because from our 21st century perspective, it's a key issue because it's the first appearance of a character that, as we've already said, is going to be very important here in the 21st century. He's going to be a marketable franchise character in his own film, Black Adam. Yep, this is the first ever appearance of Black Adam and the only appearance he made in the Golden Age, by the way. That's why I say this issue's become more significant retroactively here in the modern day because he was just kind of a one-off character back then. But Black Adam, as seen in 1945, he was originally Teth Adam. So his origin story goes. Back in the days of ancient Egypt, 5,000 years ago, SHAZAM chose him. The old wizard chose Teth Adam as a recipient of the powers of Solomon, Hercules, etc. So he became Mighty Adam. SHAZAM bestowed his powers upon him and rechristened him Mighty Adam. He was to be a defender of humankind against the forces of evil, but very soon after receiving these powers, Teth Adam succumbed to corruption. He walked right into the throne room of the Egyptian pharaoh and snapped his neck and took over the Egyptian empire and was planning to march his Egyptian forces all over the world and conquer that when SHAZAM appeared before him, denounced him, renamed him Black Adam to reflect the blackness, like the black-heartedness of his deeds, and banished him to the furthest star, which was apparently roughly 5,000 light years away.
Wow.
And it took him from then right on up to the end of 1945, flying at light speed to get back to Earth to seek vengeance.
Now, when does Black Adam reappear in the comics after this first only Golden Age appearance?
He was resurrected in the 1970s revival.
Okay.
Yep. So I think we have possibly E. Nelson Bridwell to thank for that.
Yes.
We'll know more
One of the
definitely
heroes.
when we do our spotlight on SHAZAM and the Bronze Age. But yeah, he was not seen again until the 70s. So in this appearance, he finally makes his way back to Earth, and the Marvels consult the spirit of old SHAZAM himself, because they have access to his spirit. Anytime they want to talk to him, they just go down to the chamber where Billy first got his Captain Marvel powers, light the brazier, and SHAZAM's spirit appears. And they learn the origin story of Black Adam. And then they find themselves in combat with him, and he is every bit as invulnerable as they are. So he fights the world's mightiest trio to a standstill. And Black Adam, I might also throw in here, he was drawn rather differently from the way he looks nowadays. He looked more like David Niven than he does like Dwayne Johnson. I'll tell you that. He had a high forehead with a widow's peak sharp enough to stab a person on. He had pointed ears and a very prominent chin. You know, the Fawcett artists were kind of fans of phrenology in those days. They thought villains should look like villains. So you could usually tell who the bad guy in a story was just by seeing who had the most prominent overbite or the largest forehead. Just ugly, coarse features. And sometimes they got called out on that, as we'll see as we go on here. So Black Adam, looking evil and ready to do some evil. He's planning to conquer Earth and also gain vengeance on Shazam, the old wizard who banished him. And he plans to do so. And once he discovers that Shazam has bestowed his powers on some new people, just children, he tricks them into assuming their human forms, knocks them out and gags them, and he plans to murder them right there in Shazam's chamber. But it's Uncle Marvel who comes to the rescue. He asks the spirit of Shazam on the sly for some advice, and Shazam tells him to get Black Adam to speak his name. And Uncle Marvel goes over and said, "All right, let's just give up now, kids." Definitely modeled on W.C. Fields. "We have no chance against this fellow. After all, he got his powers from old Majaj, Zamsha, Lazaba, Zaba, Zaba," and pretends not to be able to say Shazam, and playing on Black Adam's arrogance and impatience. And finally, Black Adam says, "You old fool, you mean Shazam." Boom! Down comes the magic lightning. Black Adam is transformed back into the human Teth Adam, who ages 5,000 years in an instant, crumbles into a pile of dust before them, and the threat of Black Adam is ended.
Wow.
Good and all.
Quite the ruse.
A couple of thrilling fight sequences thrown in there, but in the end, it's the cunning old shyster Uncle Marvel that saves the day. I like that. It was Uncle Marvel's finest hour, I think, since he was mostly comedy relief the rest of the time. So that was an important issue because it teams up the Marvel family for their ongoing adventures, and it also introduces Black Adam. And one more good reason, the introduction of the Rock of Eternity, which we are told we've seen for years in the Golden Age that Shazam is able to appear to the Marvels whenever they need his advice. But now we learn that his spirit dwells on this mysterious Rock of Eternity whenever he's not appearing to the Marvels. He has a modest little palace there on the rock, done up in like a classical Greek style. And the Rock of Eternity appears to be just this big freestanding stone spire, kind of like a gigantic stalagmite in the middle of nothing. We eventually learn that it stands outside of time and space, outside of the time continuum, the space-time continuum itself. And the framing sequence for this first story is actually old Shazam there on the rock, chiseling like an account of the captain of the Marvel family's exploits into the rock itself. And he does that in a few future issues of Marvel Family before that convention was abandoned. But it's just kind of depicted as this big rocky needle doesn't seem to be sitting on top of anything. Later, artists eventually reveal that it's actually symmetrically, it's a big stone spire on top, and then it tapers off again into a stone spire on the bottom. It's just this giant stone double cone shape floating in an endless void. And so that's where Shazam hangs out, and it's a fairly significant fictional locale in the Captain Marvel continuity. So there we are. December of 1945 behind us. Onward into 1946 and the bright post-war future. Right off the bat here in 1946 with the publication of Captain Marvel Adventures number 51. This issue marks Fawcett Publications and their Captain Marvel comics reaching the peak circulation. I mean, we've said before that Captain Marvel managed to outsell Superman at several points in the Golden Age.
Point? Holy mackerel.
And this issue of Captain Marvel Adventures was the best-selling issue of any Fawcett comic of the Golden Age. It's got to be damn near the best-selling comic of the Golden Age, period. I can't back that up. I don't have the figures. But Captain Marvel number 51 sold 1,384,000 copies. Wow. I believe I got that figure from Steranko's History of Comics.
Let's draw a contrast. So I just was reading some stats just the past few months. One of the most recent issues of Amazing Spider-Man, the number ordered, that means ordered by retailers, it doesn't necessarily mean sell-through numbers. I think it was about 60,000.
Wow.
So I think that speaks volumes for where the
1 million.
The American comic book is right now.
Wow.
as a commodity, shall we speak.
Oh,
yes.
So, wow, 1.3 million plus.
Yep, we had a long way to fall from 1,384,000 copies. But with numbers like that, you can understand why Fawcett was really feeling their oats.
And why DC was panicking, because, he was outselling Superman.
Sure. Yep. And DC, I mean, they filed their suit against Fawcett back in 1941, but as of 46, the case hadn't even come to trial yet. I mean, there were a bunch of hearings going on over the years, but it didn't actually come to trial until 1948. But still, the DC's resentment and their outward litigious hostility towards Fawcett was definitely a factor in a lot of Fawcett's decisions. But they actually had to assign one of their editors, Henry Perkins, to permanent case research duty. That's digging up all kinds of examples of DC kept producing examples of things that Captain Marvel did in Fawcett's comics that they thought were plagiarizing Superman. So Fawcett had to turn around and find evidence of either Captain Marvel actually having done those things before Superman did, or finding evidence of some other character, whether it be Popeye or Hercules or whoever, doing them elsewhere in popular culture. They had to devote a lot of manpower just to keeping themselves on the defense against DC.
And that's going to wear you down.
Yeah.
We also remember that DC, throughout the Golden Age, any character produced by another company they saw felt even had the most remote resemblance to Superman, they would try to sue it out of existence. I want to say Wonder Man was a character.
Yes, from the Victor Fox and his Fox Feature Syndicate.
That one rings a bell.
And they actually went after Fawcett for their Master Man character, too. And that time, Fawcett just kind of laid down arms and said, okay, you win. We won't publish that one anymore.
Yeah, so, we think of our society being very litigious today, but, there are examples of it back then, too, that are quite pronounced, to say the least.
Yep.
So,
but Fawcett wasn't letting go of Captain Marvel without a fight.
Not when it's selling over 1.3 million copies.
Yes.
No,
not in
God,
1946. They were not giving up just yet.
Think about how much money that is in 1946. That's...
It's astounding.
Even at 10 cents a copy. Yeah. So, yes, that was... Fawcett was definitely... they felt their salad days had come. And the funny thing is, there really wasn't anything that special about that issue of Captain Marvel Adventures. It's the interior stories. One of them involved... Wild Bill Batson, who was this grizzled, hard-bitten old rancher from out west who arrives in the city, convinced that Billy Batson is his long-lost grandson. He actually literally ropes Billy into coming back to his ranch with him, using his lasso. And Billy has just about been convinced that he finally has a living relative when suddenly this young desperado from the hills comes in and tries to rob Billy and Wild Bill. And Wild Bill recognizes this young man by the brand-like tattoo on his arm as his actual long-lost grandson. Apparently, he crawled away from the ranch as an infant and was raised by an old bandit out in the hills.
Of course.
So Wild Bill and his actual long-lost grandson are joyously reunited, and Wild Bill immediately takes the grandson and turns him over his knee and spanks him for for having attempted to rob him a few minutes ago.
Corporal punishment.
Yeah, spanking was actually a fairly popular image in Captain Marvel comics. Just a bold declaration in favor of gluteal punishment.
Gluteal punishment.
Quiet or Papa Spank. So it was about that point that Billy decided to make a discreet exit and go back to being an orphan in his native city.
Who can blame him?
And in a backup story, Billy goes up north to visit a lumber camp where the lumberjacks spend all their time when they're not working, sitting around telling tales of Paul Bunyan. And when Captain Marvel is called on to save the lumber camp from some natural disasters, naturally the lumberjacks mistake Cap for Paul Bunyan and hail him as Paul Bunyan and start making up new tall tales about him on the spot.
Even though there was no blue ox present?
No. That didn't seem to bother them.
Okay.
But they have some justification for that, too, since, after all, Captain Marvel is kind of like a tall tale character in his own right. So he's got some similarities to Paul Bunyan. And Cap himself didn't have the heart to correct these poor guys because they have so little else to do besides cut down trees and tell stories about Paul Bunyan that he let them have it. He went along with the gag. So that's what was happening in this blockbuster slamma-jamma best-selling issue of Captain Marvel Adventures number 51. Now, also at this time, and this is when Fawcett Publications put Captain Marvel Adventures briefly on a bi-weekly shipping schedule. I mean, just a few months earlier, just before the war officially ended, they had to cut back all their comics maybe not all, but most of them.
Paper rationing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They had to cut them back to bi-monthly. And even like a couple of months earlier, they were still running public service ads urging their readers to save paper. Because even though the war is over, paper is still needed for packaging peace products. And now here we are just a couple of months later, and they're using twice as much paper themselves by publishing Captain Marvel Adventures twice a month. But what the hey. So Captain Marvel Adventures number 52 came out on January 18th of 1946. The cover trumpeted on sale every other Friday, so apparently this was the other Friday. This issue introduced, since the Marvel family has just been introduced to readers as such like the month earlier. Dr. Sivana is already responding and bolstering his own numbers to compete. We were just introduced to Georgia Sivana, his younger daughter. Now in Captain Marvel Adventures number 52, we meet Sivana Jr., his younger son, who, like his sister Georgia, takes after his old man. He just looks like a taller, skinnier, hairier version of Sivana. He's also a little more awkward and less scientifically competent. He's kind of a goofus. So we see him getting off the spaceship from the planet Venus, where he's been kept and raised since childhood. And so he uses his fantastic Venusian inventions to try and drive off Captain Marvel. None of them work, of course. He even displays his fantastic money hater ray, which causes people to hate money and throw it all away so that the Sivanas can gather it up. But Cap then calls on the assistance of Captain Marvel Jr., who makes a somewhat rare cameo appearance. And the two of them together take on the two Sivanas, and Jr. gets after Sivana Jr. and chases him right out of Captain Marvel Adventures and into issue number 36 of Captain Marvel Jr.'s own solo series. And Sivana Jr. would thereafter become kind of the recurring antagonist for Cap Jr., the same way Georgia Sivana would be for Mary Marvel, and Sivana himself was for Cap. He was determined to become the world's most important boy. That was his aim. And he was, as I've said, he's even less successful at pursuing those aims than his old man was. Also in that issue, Captain Marvel, we see a fun kind of a two-fisted twist on the Red King paradox from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. Captain Marvel is contacted by an astronomer who has discovered, or so he thinks, that the planet Earth and the human frame of reference is all nothing but a dream, being dreamed by a giant being in another dimension. He has a special telescope that can peer into this other dimension, and he sees this giant who looks like a big peasant farmer, actually. He's just like a big bearded guy in a puffy shirt who has fallen asleep under a tree in the middle of plowing his giant field. And he's starting to stir and wake up, and it's causing earth tremors as all of the human existence is about to go out like a candle. Fantastic. So Captain Marvel flies to he wishes himself to this other dimension, because since it's like he's in a dream, so lucid dreaming, using that principle, he's able to just wish that he was with the dreamer. And there he is, and he solves the problem just by basically punching the giant dreamer in the face, knocking him out cold, and making him dream another few eons of human existence. So, yes.
Quick question, Mert. At this point, they're still having it where Marvel and Billy they share the same body, but they're separate entities, correct?
Yeah,
in terms of their identity and voice and so forth?
Yeah, we're sort of supposed to think of Captain Marvel as an idealized, magically empowered adult version of Billy. But yeah, they do have separate personalities. They have different opinions on certain issues. They sometimes criticize each other's decisions.
Okay.
Like Billy will call Cap, and Cap will say, "Oh, why did Billy call me in the middle of this situation?"
Because, not to jump ahead too much, but in more recent incarnations of the character, it's clearly Billy Batson, the kid, in the body of Captain Marvel. Right?
Absolutely. Okay. From like the mid-'80s on, it's always just the same consciousness, just switching bodies.
Fair enough.
But, back in the Golden Age, Captain Marvel and Billy were definitely separate personas. Linked, sort of the same, but different.
Right.
So, yes, that's another fun thing that happened in Captain Marvel Adventures number 52. And in that same month, Whiz Comics number 70. Cap continued to appear in one story per issue of Whiz Comics all the way through the end of the Golden Age. A story in which Captain Marvel actually takes some lives. Kind of a rarity in the Golden Age. He didn't have too many qualms about killing intelligent beings as long as they're monstrous. Like, for example, in Captain Marvel Adventures number 52, there was a third story where he traveled to 1 million AD and encountered some intelligent insects who had taken over the world. And he had no qualms about eradicating an entire city's worth of them, so that colonists from the 20th century could travel to 1 million AD and
so
repopulate.
Captain Marvel committed genocide, essentially.
Well, he killed off one city's worth of insects. There were
Fair
still
enough.
plenty of them, but the colonists he brought to the future with him then declared in no uncertain terms they were planning to kill a lot more intelligent insects so that humanity could take the planet back
And as
over.
an amusing contrast, we've just watched a couple episodes of the Old Republic serial. He's tossing gangsters off buildings, and
Yeah, he was.
no
No qualms about it.
whatsoever. Yep.
They're bad guys. Be gone.
Yeah, this is. Can this possibly be the same character who he's hamstrung multiple times in comic stories by his unwillingness to break any law anywhere? And it's a little pathetic sometimes, the things that Cap feels that he can't do in some of these stories because it would be against some minor statute someplace. But then at the same time, we see serial Cap throwing gangsters off buildings, and also Captain Marvel killing. Apparently, as long as you're not human, Cap doesn't mind killing you. And in Whiz Comics number 70, Captain Marvel is helping an intrepid young mountain climber fulfill his father's unfulfilled dream of climbing Mount Mighty, which is like an Everest stand-in.
Right.
And this young mountain climber does not want Cap to help him in any direct way. But then mysterious mishaps start befalling the climbing party. So Cap goes ahead to the top of the mountain and finds 3 hairy, like Sasquatch-like beings. They're called Shagurs. They're members of the Shagur race, and they hate all human beings.
Do they speak?
They do.
Okay.
They speak English.
Of course.
Everyone and everything and every time and every place speaks English in Captain Marvel comics. Every once in a while, a writer will acknowledge that a certain character probably wouldn't be able to speak English, and so they just explain it by saying Cap has the wisdom of Solomon and has mastery of every language ever spoken on Earth, past, present, or future.
Fantastic.
And he can learn alien tongues pretty quickly. But anyway, he encounters these Shagurs, and they declare their intent to murder any human being that comes up their mountain. So Cap just grabs the hovel in which they all live and throws it off the mountain.
See, now there's not any chance that I envisioned their voices anything other than Bender going, kill all humans?
Hey there, Captain Marvel. You want to kill all humans?
Kill all humans?
Oh, Bender's a lot funnier than these Shagurs were.
Yeah.
Though. So that's kind of an odd, isolated example of Cap killing. But again, they were not strictly human, but although they were sentient beings, and so he probably shouldn't have done what he did.
Probably not.
Moving on to Captain Marvel Adventures number 53. This is the return of an untied loose end from Captain Marvel's origin story in Whiz Comics number 2, where we learn in one panel that Billy became a street orphan after his wicked uncle threw him out so that the uncle could get his hands on Billy's inheritance. That uncle returns in CMA number 53, and his name is Ebenezer Batson. It's a good miserly name, classically inspired. He shows up poor and destitute. He squandered all the money he stole from Billy all those years ago when he threw Billy out in the street, and now he comes to Billy as Billy's come into his own as a radio reporter. He's a well-known celebrity, best friend of Captain Marvel. So Uncle Ebenezer shows up looking for a handout. Billy is tempted to tell him to go get a hike, but his better nature gets the best of him, and he takes Uncle Ebenezer to see Billy's other quote-unquote uncle, Uncle Marvel. Who runs the charitable business SHAZAM Incorporated, which accepts small honoraria from private concerns to when the Marvel family does good deeds for people who are in a position to pay for them, they will give SHAZAM Incorporated some money, and then SHAZAM Inc. funnels that into charities. And Uncle Marvel's in charge of all that. So Billy takes his Uncle Ebenezer to see Uncle Marvel, and the two of them get into kind of an uncle fight because Billy's awful real uncle resents his fake uncle. Uncle Marvel gives Uncle Ebenezer a job. Uncle Ebenezer promptly tries to rob the place, and it ends with Billy, deciding to be shut of his fake uncle, of his wicked real uncle, and just sticking with his good fake uncle henceforth. Uncle Ebenezer gets taken off to jail. And then there's also a story. Yes, Fawcett Publications has been, in the Golden Age, was kind of wildly inconsistent with their portrayal of Native Americans. That's probably true of just about every comics publisher and every producer of pop culture entertainment back in those days. There are some stories that Fawcett did that were actually very progressive and forward-thinking and tolerant of American Indians, and others that were just relying on horrible old stereotypes. One such of the latter type of story appeared in Captain Marvel Adventures number 53. It's called Captain Marvel Gets Promoted, and it takes place in Kentucky, where Billy visits the centennial celebration in 1946 of the founding of Kentucky. And he talks to an old military colonel who's like a docent or in charge of one of the exhibits there, who tells him tall tales about the old Indian wars. The colonel then gets hit on the head and hallucinates that he's back in 1846, and there are still like peyote Indians around that are causing trouble, and he promotes Captain Marvel on the spot to go. What rank did he give him? Colonel. That's right. He promotes him to Colonel Marvel, and they run around fighting imaginary Indians. But then some actual and very badly stereotyped Indians show up. They have apparently been living in an underground cavern for the past 100 years and just found their way out to the surface that day. And they're all saying things like, ugh, ugh, paleface, heap bad medicine. These are literally examples of the dialogue that these characters were saying.
Well, we have to remember that
It is 1946.
American Indians were only given U.S. citizenship in 1924.
Wow.
So, and if you look at many of the classic westerns in the films like the 1950s, I mean, usually the leading Native American was played by a white guy in many cases. Think of The Searchers, for example, but the classic John Wayne film. So, that this is not surprising, to say the least.
Not surprising, but still disheartening. And Fawcett, as I said, a couple of the stories they'd done earlier in the Golden Age actually did a fairer shake to American Indians, but not this one. And it's not the end of it either, unfortunately. Let's see. Captain Marvel Adventures number 54. Not only is this title being published twice monthly now, they actually increase for one issue the page count to 64 pages. That's 5 Captain Marvel stories for one low cover price. Okay, so I have all 5 of the stories outlined here. In the first one, Dr. Sivana uses a robotic Captain Marvel suit to battle Captain Marvel and then later discredit him. He kidnaps Billy, holds him hostage. Then he stages a jailbreak, lets all kinds of criminals out, and flies around in this Captain Marvel suit doing little picayune things like rescuing cats from trees, just to ruin Captain Marvel's good name. But, of course, Billy gets loose and gives to Sivana what for. Story number 2, The Country Slicker. A country bumpkin is tricked into trading his farm for the Station Whiz radio building by a couple of city scamsters. And with a little help from Captain Marvel, he goes back to the country and out-scams the scamsters. So a little city mouse, country mouse story there. Story 3, Marooned in the Future. Captain Marvel agrees to test pilot a new kind of high-speed jet plane and ends up breaking the time barrier and going to a future in which Earth's metal resources have all been tapped dry. And his plane is immediately cannibalized for its metal components, and Cap has to find his own way back to the 20th century. Story number 4, Station Whiz Goes Television. Now, this is kind of a landmark thing. This is, of all the stories in this issue, this is the one that has the most repercussions for the future. This is the first time that Station Whiz was shown making a television broadcast. And in the future, we would very often still see Billy making radio broadcasts.
Well, very few Americans had televisions in 1946.
True.
That's interesting.
So Fawcett's being kind of ahead of the curve here.
Yeah.
Kind of giving Whiz televisual capacity. But, that the proportion of appearances of Billy as radio broadcaster and television broadcaster tips more and more towards television as we get towards the end of the Golden Age. But this was the first time Whiz was shown broadcasting in TV.
And you're right here, Cap turns crooner.
Yes, because Cap wants to help out with Whiz's addition of television. They were still broadcasting over radio, of course, but he tries out for a number of different talents. He proves to be a dismal failure as both an actor and a comedian, but when he sings a few notes, the lady rehearsal pianist in the studio faints dead away. So the person auditioning him then realizes they got a velvet gold mine on their hands here. So he becomes a crooner, and the headline the next day is that 11,476 women swoon across the city after his first broadcast.
Bobby Soxer's bird.
Yes. Captain Marvel discovers that everywhere he goes after that, he is swarmed by autograph-seeking Bobby Soxers. So he kind of hates being a crooner, but he's stuck because he feels obligated to continue to help Station Whiz.
And Marvel's always uncomfortable by women, correct?
Extremely.
Yeah.
Yes. Attractive women have long been Captain Marvel's greatest weakness. He is terrified of them. It's the 14-year-old in him bubbling to the surface, I think. So then when a classically trained opera singer whose career is hit the skids, his name is Pietro Laringio, shows up, and he wants to sabotage Captain Marvel's singing career. He slips some alum into his drinking water. Captain Marvel lets him because he wants out of this crooning thing. So he drinks the poisoned water. He chokes in mid-performance in the next radio broadcast. His career is belly up by the next day, and Captain Marvel couldn't be happier about it. He actually gets Laringio a singing gig on Station Whiz as a way of saying thanks. And the final story in Captain Marvel Adventures number 54, Cap's Tour of Cities. That series of stories in which Captain Marvel visits American metropolises, great and small, usually with certain kickback concerns for Fawcett Publications involved. That series of stories resumes in CMA number 54 as Cap visits Kansas City. Yeah, that had been discontinued for about 10 issues, and it starts up again here. Future cities Cap would visit in his tour as it continues are Columbus, Ohio, Mobile, Alabama, Rochester, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Baltimore, and the last stop, end of the line in Cap's Tour of Cities in issue number 69 of Captain Marvel Adventures, Fort Worth, Texas. These usually contain little cameos by local politicians or celebrities, public figures, and sometimes magazine distributors whose favor Fawcett wanted to curry. Give them a little cameo in a Captain Marvel comic. Something to show to the grandkids. All right, then. So that was the only 64-page issue of Captain Marvel Adventures, though. They'd be cut back to 48 pages subsequently, or roughly 4 stories per issue, plus little humorous gag strips and things. Okay, so then jumping ahead to Captain Marvel Adventures number 57, Captain Marvel comes across a prophetic book buried in what appears to be a time capsule out in a forest someplace. And the title of that book is Exploits of Captain Marvel in 1946. And so it's a bit of a mystery how a book as old as that book appeared to be had detailed descriptions of Captain Marvel's doings in that year. An unscrupulous publisher gets his hand on the book, and he wants to publish it. He publishes a few excerpts in a newspaper, and criminals, of course, try to take advantage of what they see there by circumventing what Captain Marvel's known to be doing in 1946, but Cap manages to get the better of them at every turn, of course, regardless. And the big reveal at the end of the story is that the book has actually had a copyright date of 1977. It was written in the future, and apparently a time traveler whose ship crashed in 1946 brought it back in time with him.
Now, quick question. Was the DC relaunch series running in 1977?
It
Shazam?
actually was just about wrapping up by then, I think, and then it moved into like the backup feature of World's Finest Comics. But yeah, funny thing, 1977 is. I mean, the author is given as O. Binder, as in Otto Binder, the writer of most of the Captain Marvel stories of the Golden Age. He was actually deceased by 1977. But in 1977, that was the year that E. Nelson Bridwell edited and published Shazam from the 40s to the 70s, which is like a hardcover compilation of classic Golden Age and Bronze Age Captain Marvel stories. So kind of a funny coincidence there. It's the kind of thing that Grant Morrison just eats up.
Sure.
And also in that issue, a couple of secondary stories. There's a touching little story called The Haunted Girl, which is about a father who passes away. His young daughter is distraught, and she feels she's alone in the world. She tries out to be a singer on Whiz Radio, and her father's ghost hangs around and just tries to keep her life on the straight and narrow, saves her from some criminals who try to recruit her to act as lookout for one of their jobs. And Captain Marvel is kind of mixed in all the way, but it's kind of a touching little story. They do try to do things They did in the Golden Age at Fawcett try to do things that were a little off-genre. A lot of stories that were told with Captain Marvel that weren't what we would understand in the present day as your meat and potatoes superhero-type stories. And that's a good example. Also in that issue, Captain America discovers Captain America. My lips are revolting against me here. Captain Marvel discovers a lost colony of pioneers somewhere in the border between Idaho and Montana who have been living in isolation for 300 years and don't know anything about the United States. So he acts as kind of ambassador. Well, first he has to defeat the entire standing army of the Pioneer Kingdom, which is like 10 guys. And then he oversees the annexation of the Pioneer Kingdom. It becomes Pioneerville, USA, and the king of the Pioneer Kingdom becomes the mayor. And everybody's much happier for being American citizens. God bless America. That same month, Whiz Comics number 72, they were really high on Captain Marvel at Fawcett back then, understandably so, because in that comic, there were actually 2 Captain Marvel stories. The first time that happened in the Golden Age. Usually it was just one Cap story, one Ibis the Invincible, one Spy Smasher, and so on. But in Whiz number 72, there were 2 Cap stories. In one of them, Captain Marvel visits the subterranean kingdom of Ogreland, and in the other...
what is going on here?
You're reading my note there. Yeah. Cap investigates a mysterious fissure in the ocean. He goes down there and discovers it leads straight down to hell, where he's met by a couple of demons who assure him that, oh, no, we opened that crack up there so that we can open hell as a theme park. Yeah. We've been getting a bad rap from, shady little rags like the Bible. No, this is a fun place for people to visit. Yeah, we want to encourage a tourist trade down here in hell. And Cap's like, well, okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, until he discovers a little later on that that fissure in the ocean allowed some mermaids to pour down there into hell, and that the demons captured them and were tormenting them. So, and had every intention of doing the same thing to any unwary human tourists who actually bought their little ad campaign and visited hell. They were going to be taken captive and tortured.
Wow.
So Cap rescues mermaids that were being tortured by demons in hell and sealed the crack up and just gave those demons what for. Whew. So that is what this note here means when I say that, quote, Cap rescues mermaids who are being tortured by demons in hell.
All right, Murda, I have to, if you let me grant me this indulgence, I have to read the description of the next issue.
I will allow you to do that, Chris.
All right. So Captain Marvel Adventures, right?
Yes, that's
issue
what
58,
CMA stands for.
1946. A 3-part Sivana novella. Thanks to his, quote, peace machine, end quote, Sivana conquers Earth and rules it, wait for it, for 37 hours and 15 minutes before Cap deposes him.
That's oddly specific.
Proceed.
That's a kind of fun little detail that Otto Binder liked to throw into his stories. So. Yep, this was a full-length issue, like an issue-length story. Dr. Sivana invents a device. It's hand-mounted like a joy buzzer at first. He tests it out on some crime lords. It generates an electrical charge that kills all violent impulses in the human being and turns them into pacifistic, submissive, peace-loving pussycats. And so he gets all the crime lords he comes in contact with to become just like peace-loving, and he talks them very easily into signing over their criminal empires to him. But then he wants to take things to the next level. He and his daughter Beautia go up to their summer home on Venus, and from there they invent a giant version of this peace machine, in kind of like a ray cannon, that they're going to use to blanket the entire Earth with peace rays, to turn everyone on Earth into a submissive little, as in Sivana's terms, sissy, so that Sivana can then go down there and very easily take over. Captain Marvel trails them up there, of course, and somehow Sivana tricks him. He convinces Captain Marvel that he's surrendering, and he wants Captain Marvel to deliver a speech on the values of democracy, I think, to the Venusian natives. So he brings I think he was as Billy at that point, into a machine that will allow him to learn the Venusian language instantly. But what Sivana doesn't tell Billy is that it will erase all Billy's knowledge of English. So now he can no longer say the magic word Shazam. He can only say the Venusian equivalent, Shazoogle. And Sivana then goes, heh, 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 and flies away to Earth to take it over, leaving poor Beautia. Beautia, his daughter, has feelings for Cap, of course, and understands that Billy and Cap are one and the same person. So she feels bad for poor Billy wandering around saying Ozel, Guzel, Giglip, and other Venusian things. So she finally leads him back into the chamber and restores his knowledge of English. He says Shazam, he flies to Earth, and he destroys the peace ray machine first, goes down, deposes Sivana, and by then people are coming out of the effects of the peace machine, and an angry mob takes Sivana away, and that's that. But yes, Sivana did rule Earth for exactly 37 hours and 15 minutes. That's got to be a career high for him, actually.
Yeah.
It's the closest thing to a success he's got on his record, I'm pretty sure. And as a backup story on that issue, Cap discovers a hidden civilization of talking apes on an island. They're a little more evolutionarily advanced than your average gorilla, kind of like a missing link. And a sailor in the 18th century was marooned there and taught them how to speak English. So it's not quite the technological utopia that Gorilla City, say, is at DC Comics. Speaking of civilizations of talking apes,
sure.
But
sure sounds similar.
It's something. And Cap arrives there and makes friends with them just in time to save them from being captured by a bunch of poachers who are going to sell them to freak shows and stuff. Right. Then later that same month, Captain Marvel Adventures number 59 sees the first appearance of another fairly major Captain Marvel antagonist. This is a crime lord named Minerva in her first appearance. Afterwards, she's called Aunt Minerva. And she is an elderly lady crime boss. Captain Marvel mentions in this story that he's heard whispers of a lady crime boss in his city, but he never believed them until he came face-to-face with her in this story. She's got to be in her early 80s, I think, but she's tough as nails. She's the physical equal of any of the torpedoes she employs in her crime empire. When any of them give her any backtalk, she picks them up bodily and throws them across the room. And she's an unbeatable crack shot with a pistol. So she is a formidable lady. But she's lonely. She's tired of having all these weak little lesser criminals serving under her around. She misses her 5 husbands, all of whom mysteriously died young. Rumor has it they were suicides because they just couldn't take living under Minerva's heel not too much longer. So she hears mention of SHAZAM Incorporated and goes over there in the hopes that the Marvel family can find her a 6th husband. While there, she falls in love with Uncle Marvel and tries to shotgun marry him. But Captain Marvel comes to her rescue. He's a bit forceful with her, using a little more physical force than he usually can bring himself to with a lady. But that was enough to make Aunt Minerva fall in love with him. And so in her few Golden Age appearances after this, her introduction, she's trying to woo and wed Captain Marvel instead of Uncle Marvel.
I was going to ask you, wasn't there a Batman 66 TV show character named Minerva? At one point?
That rings a bell, Shane.
And I was going to say, is it the same character, but that's completely not.
Couldn't possibly be.
No.
Do you remember her being older?
Not that old, no. And that was the first thing. But when you said she started picking people up and throwing them around, I'm like, nah, that's not her.
Yeah, she's a force to contend with there, that Aunt Minerva. But I'll tell you where Aunt Minerva did appear, though, in live action. That that infamous Hanna-Barbera produced superhero roast that was produced in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
We always talk
yeah.
about that. It had Adam West in it.
Yep.
Ruth Buzzy appeared as Aunt Minerva.
God, that's right.
Ruth Buzzy.
And
Nice.
she threatened to marry the actor playing Uncle Marvel right there on stage and brought him to tears.
Who played Captain Marvel in that? Do we remember?
I have no idea.
Okay. I haven't watched that in years.
I don't know if it was...
I thought it was the same guy who did on the TV show.
John Davey, probably, by then.
I'll try to look that up.
It's worth investigating. And at some point, Ruth Buzzy said "Shazam" and turned into a hot young actress. And at that point, Captain Marvel was crying for a different reason, for
space
not
nuts.
marrying her on stage. All right, so that's a fairly important character. She would show up again in the Bronze Age too. Also in that issue, a wicked witch. Who was imprisoned centuries ago by an ancestor of Sterling Morris, Sir Maurice of Hedgestone, comes looking for revenge on Mr. Morris for what his ancestor did to her. She transforms herself into a beautiful young woman named Stella Stitch and gets a job as a receptionist at Station Wiz and tries to murder Mr. Morris subtly in that position. Never mind the fact that she's still wearing a peaked cap like a witch wears. Nobody makes the connection. Story ends by Captain Marvel chasing her out of the city, and then she falls into a pit of quicksand and suffocates.
Who did we think? Who was the original Captain Marvel?
The original was Jackson Bostwick, but he walked from the show after the first season. He was replaced by John Davey.
This was Garrett Craig.
Never heard of him.
Me either.
So, different dude, obviously.
Different dude.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, that thing wasn't produced by Filmation, so it probably wouldn't have been
Yeah.
the same actor. All right, and in a third story in that issue, Captain Marvel encounters a character who might have been inspired by the Shining Knight character from DC.
Really?
Yeah, might have been. I mean, he was a Arthurian knight of the Round Table. His name was Sir Marvel, and he was known in the days of Camelot as the world's mightiest mortal. He wore red armor with a lightning bolt on it. Well, the coincidences never end. He was riding up north to answer a challenge to fight a lord who lives up there when he fell into a fissure in the earth and fell into suspended animation for hundreds of years, which is pretty much exactly what happened to Sir Justin, the Shining Knight, in DC's Golden Age continuity. And then he thawed out in 1946 and somehow finds his way into the city where Captain Marvel lives, and the two of them have a clash. But Sir Marvel is aging rapidly and dies of old age before it can really be determined whether he or Captain Marvel deserve the title World's Mightiest Mortal. It's kind of left in question. So, I guess chivalry really is dead of instant old age. Also happening this same month, which I believe is April of 1946, a note from WOW Comics, number 35, which is the Mary Marvel. That's the comic where Mary Marvel was appearing. It's the first appearance of an unofficial additional member of the Marvel family, not so often seen, Freckles Marvel. She actually has a passing mention in Who's Who in the DC Universe, Volume 1. Her real name is Mary Dudley. And or so she claims, anyway. She shows up at the offices of SHAZAM Inc. when Mary and Uncle Marvel are hanging out there, and she claims to be Uncle Marvel's long-lost niece, just as Uncle Marvel claimed to be Mary and Billy's long-lost uncle, though he really isn't. And I'm pretty sure that Mary Dudley is not Uncle Dudley's real niece either. She's an annoying little teenage Bobby Zoxer, and she wants in on the Marvel family's adventures, and she threatens to reveal Uncle Marvel's secret, i.e. that he doesn't really have Shazam powers and is in no way related to the Marvels, if he doesn't sponsor her for membership in the Marvel family. She even has her own Mary Marvel outfit, which she made herself. And in this, her first appearance, she basically gets in the way as Mary and Uncle Marvel try to foil a crime. Yes, she has no powers whatsoever, but she makes up for what she lacks in powers in spunk and obnoxiousness. I have in my notes here, think Scrappy-Doo in a homemade Mary Marvel dress. Pretty much covers it.
Quite an image.
Yeah. She's a little bit younger than Mary is. She's kind of a contemporary. So she became sort of an on-and-off supporting character in Mary's strip, sometimes in costume as Freckles Marvel, sometimes just as Mary's gal pal Freckles.
Just a little side note, the Batman 60s TV show, Minerva, was Zsa Zsa Gabor.
All right.
It was bugging me. I had to look it up.
All right, so your memory did not betray you, Shay.
Oh, no. Thank goodness.
Now we come to Captain Marvel Adventures number 61, May 24th of 46. Now this is another milestone in the Marvel's Golden Age history. Now we've already touched on the Monster Society of Evil long-running serial that ran for 25 straight issues of Captain Marvel Adventures, 2 years. Just
That's still amazing.
An unequaled feat.
I mean, it's you don't see that in general.
No.
Yeah,
comics.
certainly didn't see it in the Golden Age.
No.
But Fawcett, again, they were really kind of cocky in 1946, and they were going to try and catch lightning in the bottle twice. So, in May of 46, 1 year after the Monster Society of Evil wrapped up, they decided to attempt a second serial in Captain Marvel Adventures. This one was called The Cult of the Curse, and it was written by Otto Binder. And it introduced a new antagonist for Captain Marvel, and it was Agar, the world's mightiest immortal. So that serial began in this issue of Captain Marvel Adventures number 61 with a mysterious palace appearing on the land of a grizzled old prospector. And when he tries to tell this claim rustler to scoot off his land, he goes to the door, and this mysterious pointed-eared, toga-clad gentleman answers the gate and refuses to be budged. So the prospector immediately runs off to the city to find Billy Batson and get Captain Marvel's help, logically enough. And Captain Marvel goes over there, and the T and Agar, who is the name of the toga-clad gentleman who lives in there, have a kind of a thrilling battle with one another. It's revealed that Agar knows Shazam, knows of him, knows of his powers, and the battle is kind of a stalemate. Captain Marvel then goes to consult the spirit of the old wizard Shazam and learns Agar's origin. Apparently, in days of old, Shazam and the six gods who give him his name formed. They were kind of like a Justice League of Immortals. They were a council that was more directly involved in the fate of humankind than they were by the 20th century when they were acting through the agent that was Captain Marvel. And Agar was actually one of their number as kind of a minor god. Shazam drew on his godly might the same way he did the other six deities, and for a while there, Shazam's name and magic word was Shazamo, the O standing for Agar. But after a while, Agar proved to be slowly turning to the dark side, and so Shazam renounced him, kicked him out of this Council of Immortals, and even gave him a bit of a curse for good measure. And that curse, as it turns out, was that he gave him cloven goat's hooves. That's why he wears that floor-length toga, to hide his embarrassing satiric abdomen, which is he has the legs of a goat, and so he's a little self-conscious about that. But here we are, 3,000 years later. Agar has returned, and he's determined to build power on. No explanation is really given as to what he's been doing since then, but he just kind of pops up in 1946, and he's going to build influence among humankind by founding this cult of the curse. That's his big scheme, and so. The remainder of the serial is devoted to kind of a cat and mouse between Captain Marvel and Agar. Agar is trying desperately, with kind of a comical lack of success, to build this cult. The only converts he's able to find are like 4 asylum inmates, like lunatics who believe that they are historical figures like Napoleon and Julius Caesar. But they are willing to join his cult of the curse. So the arrangement with the initiation into the cult is you join, you go through this special little private ceremony where a brand is put on your forehead. After that, you enjoy all the rights and privileges of association with Agar. You get like enhanced power of some kind. But if you ever betray or fail Agar and the ideals of the cult, you will be stricken with the curse of the cult of the curse, and that curse is madness. But Agar can't get anybody but these 4 loonies to join up with him. He tries all these different little scams to try and trick people into joining the cult. Like he invites them to see a free animal demonstration. It turns out it's an ancient Roman-style gladiatorial lion show, and he threatens everyone there that they'll be fed to the lions if they don't join the cult. Another time, he tries to trade compulsive gamblers like markers for their membership in the cult, and Captain Marvel thwarts him at every turn. He was told by SHAZAM that Agar has one crucial weakness that even Agar himself doesn't know about. And so Captain Marvel tries every time he and Agar clash to feel out what this weakness is. Okay, this time I'm going to try pulling his ears. Oh, that wasn't it. I'll kick him in the shins. Nope, that wasn't it. Just trying to find the Achilles heel. And meanwhile, Agar is repelling Captain Marvel every way he knows how by trying all kinds of magic spells. But one shortcoming of his magic is he can never use the same spell against the same opponent twice. So every time he comes in contact with Captain Marvel, he has to get rid of him in a different magical way. Yeah. So by the end of the serial, both he and Captain Marvel have resorted to keeping notebooks, like little crib sheets. Like Captain Marvel has to keep track of all the different weaknesses he's tried, and Agar has to keep track of the spells that he's used to magic Captain Marvel away. And as we go along here, one by one, the 4 loonies who signed on with Agar's Cult of the Curse fail him, and they're smitten with madness, but since they're already insane, the curse actually cancels out the madness they already have, and suddenly they're stricken sane. Like, what am I doing dressed like Napoleon? I'm just good old George Blake. Well, better take off these silly clothes and go back to being a productive member of society. So one by one, Agar loses his only loyal henchman and fails time and again to recruit any new ones. By the by, the induction ceremony to the Cult of the Curse, when the brand is put on their forehead, what really happens is Agar takes the inductees into a darkened room and kicks them in the head.
Wow.
Puts a little hoof print on their head. So finally, the last little trick that Agar tries to get recruits for his cult is by offering insanely cheap passage on a cruise ship, which turns out to be a slave galley. So Captain Marvel shows up and frees everybody from this galley. One of the women who are captive on this galley sasses Agar, and he tries to strike her dead with a magic spell, but nothing happens. And this is how Billy accidentally discovers the weakness that SHAZAM told him about. Agar's powers don't work on women. That is the weakness. So wouldn't you know, at the end of that story, as Agar flees the cruise ship, Captain Marvel pursues him. They end up on a desert island, which just happens to be where the ancient sorceress Circe is living. And it turns out that Circe is an ex-girlfriend of Agar's. Agar is the one who kind of cursed her with eternal life, but not youth. So she's this horribly withered old crone by now. She's 3,000 years old, and she's hated all men for millennia because of what Agar did to her. And so delivered into her hands is the one man she hates above all, and his magic won't work on her, but her magic works on him. So she transforms Agar into a wild boar. That's always Circe's favorite trick, turning men into animals. She's been doing it since the Odyssey. So Agar, in boar form, runs for his life from Captain Marvel and from Circe, and falls over a sea cliff, and apparently his boar form is not as immortal as his humanoid form was, because he's dashed to bits on the rocks below and dies. The end.
Wow.
Little anticlimactic. Circe, for her part, is freed of Agar's curse of eternal life and just crumbles into dust. And Captain Marvel just says, oh well, guess that takes care of them. And That's the da-da-da-da-da-da, Cult of the Curse. That's so. Yeah, this serial was not quite the grand undertaking that the Monster Society of Evil was. It actually lasted only 6 chapters, as opposed to the 25 that the Monster Society of Evil did. Writer Otto Binder himself, he takes all the blame onto himself for the failure of this serial to gain any traction. He said it seemed like a good idea in his head, but when he tried to execute it, it didn't quite turn out the way he wanted. It didn't develop a following. It was kind of a non-starter. To put it in his own words, it was, quote, a flop, to be frank. So,
Mert, I have a general question here. These stories, as you look them over now from a 21st century perspective, granted, we're all versed in the golden age and the history and so forth. Do you find them charming, or do you find them quaint in a juvenile way? Like, what audience were they writing for? Were they writing strictly for kids?
One gets the impression
very idiosyncratic. So
maybe somewhat offensive to female viewers of nowadays. I think the Mary Marvel stories were actually written, explicitly for a younger audience.
Okay.
Like they thought little girls wanted more childish stories, so they took on more the character of fairy tales. Captain Marvel stories were more of a general audience, though.
Okay.
And I think they thought they were writing more for children than for grown people, but there was a level of social satire in some of the stories that probably would have gone over like the average 10-year-old's head, for example.
All right.
So it's a little hard to second guess what they were doing back in 1940 ? But yeah, that's what I think. Right. So that serial, The Cult of the Curse, started in Captain Marvel Adventures number 61 and wrapped up in number 66. It didn't quite prove the equal of Mr. Mind's Monster Society of Evil, but Agar was also brought back as part,
of course,
in the 70s. All right, Captain Marvel Adventures number 62, June of 46. A somewhat rare appearance by Captain Marvel's original family, the Lieutenant Marvels. They come back to help Captain Marvel foil a train robbery perpetrated by a criminal named, I kid you not, Choo Choo Charlie. It's an ultra-modern train, too, with all the conveniences. A bowling alley, movie theater, the whole nine.
Of course.
Yep, and all the different Billy Batsons had jobs on the train. They were set up there by Mr. Morris as a surprise for real Billy Batson. And together they used their Captain Marvel powers to thwart the great train robbery. And in another story, that same issue, Cap does something that doesn't involve punching bad guys at all and invents an atomic plane engine. Just to show that that wisdom of Solomon is good for more than second-guessing crooks.
And, of course, as we enter the atomic era, and I mean, there's a sort of an unofficial demarcation point in comics history when we talk about eras. They talk about the Atom Age. And you start to see the beginnings of that here with some of these stories.
Right. Yeah, and atomic energy and science in general does figure largely in a lot of Golden Age Captain Marvel stories. Otto Binder was, he loved comics, he loved superheroes, but first and foremost, he was a science fiction guy. He was of the first generation of fan sci-fi writers. He wrote a lot of text piece stories for Captain Marvel comics. There was a character of his called John Jarlson, I believe, under the pseudonym of Eando Binder. He and his older brother Earl used to write stories as Eando Binder, so he sort of adopted that. So, yeah, science fiction was his first love, and that's very visible in a lot of the Captain Marvel scripts he turned in. I've been saying to myself as I go through here that the average Captain Marvel story of the Golden Age is part pulp science fiction, part tall tale, part screwball comedy, and part World's Fair exhibition, because it's just got this goggle-eyed, golly-gee-wow attitude towards scientific developments and achievements of the day. And atomic energy is one of them. Otto Binder, through some of these Captain Marvel stories he wrote, was kind of an apologist for the beneficial applications of atomic energy. And this story where Cap invents an atomic airplane engine is an example of that. All right, then Marvel Family number 2. This is June of 46, so it's been 6 months since the first issue of Marvel Family. They finally get around to publishing a second issue, decided they wanted to make an ongoing series out of it. This is the only time in the Golden Age in which the entire Marvel Family appeared together in a single comic. Not just Mary, Jr., and Cap, but also Uncle Marvel and the Lieutenant Marvels. So, yeah, they all come together for a Marvel family reunion, just like a big party at Uncle Marvel's house. And also attending is Aunt Minnie Marvel, who turns out to be just Sivana in drag. Sneaks in to try and kill a few Marvels in their sleep. It doesn't quite work out for him. So, yep, that's significant, that it's got all those Marvels in one place. And also that month, in Whiz number 75, Captain Marvel finds himself named king of a small European country. And he sticks around just long enough to save the outgoing king from assassination attempts by his crummy brother, and then abdicates and helps to transition this small country to American-style democracy.
Of course.
Because that's the only happy ending for any story of this kind. Let's see. July 1946, nothing much to report there. Captain Marvel Adventures, with issue number 63, stops being published bi-weekly. So that gives you an idea right there that the air was already, as of then, being let out of the post-war superhero comics balloon. Because Fawcett is losing some of its initial bravado and confidence and dialing back their operations a little bit.
Well, we should remind listeners, if they're not aware, that, as you mentioned, as you get into the latter 40s and into the 50s, most of the superhero characters vanish from the stands. I mean, DC only retained, the trinity of Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, and Aquaman, and was it Hawkman or Green Arrow? Green Arrow. Thank you. The timely characters they were essentially done away with. They tried to resurrect them briefly in the 50s, but that didn't work out when Captain America was the commie smasher, for example. So it's a good point that. No one was really spared this. I mean, Captain Marvel was selling 1.3 million, right, earlier that year, but we're probably going to see a gradual diminishment of those numbers.
Oh,
so,
yes. It is sort of, we began at the peak of the Fawcett Empire, and we're just going to be seeing a slow, gradual decline from then on. Oh, another example of this very decline, in fact, also found in July of 46, Whiz Comics number 76. I'm not even talking about the Captain Marvel story in that issue. Spy Smasher, the character who co-starred with Captain Marvel in Whiz Comics since its first issue. He was kind of like the closest thing to a Batman analog that the Fawcett Comics universe ever had. He was decommissioned in this issue. He received an honorable discharge from the United States military since the war was over, and a Spy Smasher was, at least until the beginning of the Cold War, not really seen as necessary anymore. So Spy Smasher had a retirement ceremony. He bid farewell to his military contact, Admiral Corby, and went off with Admiral Corby's daughter, Eve, who was Spy Smasher's love interest, and found a new direction in life pretty quickly as a plainclothes private eye. So then thereafter, he was just plain old Alan Armstrong crime smasher. And he was going to be solving just normal crime cases with Eve as his gal Friday, like Nora Charles, who is Nick Charles. That strip lasted less than a year.
Yikes.
And it just kind of vanished from the pages of Whiz Comics after that. So, further signs of the changing times and the changing tastes. Captain Marvel Adventures number 64. Cap ran up against an impish antagonist, not unlike Superman's Mr. Mxyzptlk, or Muxist as his Golden Age incarnation was called. And this was Lester, the little man who wasn't there. Now, this is a story that's very loosely based on a Robert Louis Stevenson short story called The Bottle Imp. Captain Marvel meets a sailor who is about to commit suicide by jumping off a building so he could stop seeing the mischievous little man named Lester that follows him everywhere, causing mischief. Apparently, this sailor was marooned on a desert island at one point and found a bottle containing enchanted water. And when he drank this enchanted water, he began seeing this strange, pin-headed little imp who is invisible and inaudible to everyone but the last person to have drunk of the enchanted water. And he likes to pull little practical jokes, driving people crazy, and most especially the one person who can see him at any given time. Captain Marvel volunteers to prove how ridiculous the sailor is being by taking the bottle of enchanted water. What do you suppose that's supposed to metaphorically represent? And takes a sip of it. And sure enough, for the rest of that issue, he is plagued by Lester everywhere he goes, besmearing Captain Marvel's good name by framing him for stupid little poor old practical jokes. Till finally, Captain Marvel goes to see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist does exactly what Captain Marvel did with the sailor. To prove to Captain Marvel that Lester is all in his head, the psychiatrist takes the bottle and drinks the last few drops of enchanted water out of it, thereby dooming himself to be stuck with Lester for the rest of time to come. So,
now, does Captain Marvel forget about Lester when... Do you forget about it?
No.
Passed on?
You just stop seeing him, and Lester also kind of loses interest in you and begins bedeviling the new person who can see him from then on. That's the only time Lester shows up in the Golden Age of comics, but it's just I like imp stories.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I think our friend Chris Murrin can sympathize with that. He's the world's biggest Mixus Pitlick fan, so he's probably read this story. Let's see, CMA number 65. It's a War of the Worlds story. It's also a rare guest appearance by Mary Marvel, as Cap and Mary team up to take on an invasion of H.G. Wellsian Martian tripods. But like the Orson Welles version of the War of the Worlds, it turns out to all be a big hoax perpetrated by Dr. Sivana himself. It's the aliens that come out of the tripods. Their bodies look like big green potatoes with like a single eye and tentacular limbs, but their legs just look like human beings' legs in pants with shoes. So that should be your first hint that these are not real aliens. But yeah, so a little War of the Worlds style timeliness there. And as a backup story, we mentioned Mechanics Illustrated magazine earlier. There's a backup story that is just like a big 8-page plug for a mechanic. It's called The Mechanics Illustrated Adventure, and it's all about how an average boy named Tommy Tinker helps Captain Marvel catch some crooks using all the swell inventions that he built himself using plans he found in good old Mechanics
Not just
Illustrated
inventions,
magazine.
ladies and gentlemen. Swell inventions.
Swell, except no other kind. Yes, and did we mention that Bill Parker, the co-creator of Captain Marvel, was the longtime editor of Mechanics Illustrated?
No, we have not.
Well, he was. He probably had something to do with this story seeing print, too, I'd be willing to bet. But yeah, it's Mechanics Illustrated was also published by Fawcett, so it's just an 8-page house ad masquerading as a story, in essence. I just thought it was funny. Captain Marvel Adventures number 66. Now, this is a well-remembered story by Fawcett collectors.
Wow.
Captain Marvel and the Atomic War. The lighthearted humor and silliness and exaggerated action of a lot of other Captain Marvel stories is completely absent from this one. This is just straight-on, somber, like Cold War-era propaganda. In this story, it begins in the Whiz building as Billy and Mr. Morris get word that Chicago has been wiped out by an atomic bomb. And this is not a drill. So Captain Marvel goes to investigate. He finds people dying of radiation poisoning all over the place. A young woman and her baby just kind of die in his arms
Really?
of radiation. And then more bombs start falling all over the place. Nobody seems to know where they're coming from. Captain Marvel eventually, with a little help from the U.S. government, tracks the bombs to their source, which is in an alien... The country is never identified. It could be...
Interesting enough, because is this still 1946? Mm-hmm. Because the Soviet Union didn't develop their first bomb until 1949. So they wouldn't necessarily have ascribed us to the Russians.
Nope.
So
it was a phantom menace. It could have been any foreign nation on Earth. But they're the ones who began firing bombs at the United States. And then all over the place, paranoia and panic takes over. Nations just start randomly bombing one another, firing bombs in all directions. The upshot of all this is, the city that Cap calls home, which incidentally, having read... blow my own horn for a second here. Having read just about every single Captain Marvel comic of the Golden Age in preparation for this episode, I can now safely say that the name Fawcett City was never actually used.
That's just a DC invention, isn't it?
I believe it was,
Yeah.
yes, in the Bronze Age. Wow. But yeah, in the Golden Age, Cap City is never named. I think the idea is inhabitants of any city, comic book readers in any city in the nation could assume that Cap lives where they live if they want.
Clever device to make the reader feel like they're part of that world. Mm-hmm. Where did you get all these issues to read them?
Anybody who would like to follow in my footsteps here can go to digitalcomicmuseum.com.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Because the entire Fawcett body, just about every Fawcett comic is now considered public domain, I believe. So, DC can't claim ownership of them. So they're up there to be read. And I'd like to give a shout-out to our listener, Troy Younger, alias Aqua Troy on the forums, because one or two of the Captain Marvel comics I read in preparation for these episodes were posted there, scanned and posted by him. So thank you, Troy, for your contribution to this effort. So, yes, anyway, Captain Marvel and the Atomic War, his home city was destroyed. He had to cope with the death of his entire supporting cast. And then, as the bombs really go crazy, within 24 hours, all life on Earth except Captain Marvel, since he's 100% invulnerable, has been snuffed out. And he's just sitting there in his red suit and his bright yellow boots, sobbing in the wreckage of the world. And then the camera pulls back, and we see that everything we've seen so far has actually been on a TV screen. And then Captain Marvel addresses the camera saying, "Hi, folks. We apologize for the limitations of this simulation put together by Station Whiz for your benefit." The whole thing was just like an elaborate PSA, warning against the horrors of atomic war.
Do we know who wrote this story?
I cannot say. I wish I knew.
Because it's such a departure from sort of the whimsical tone of this book up to this point. I'm actually kind of blown away by this.
Quite dark.
That they because atomic energy was new. I mean, this is only a year after the war, and the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The United States did start doing tests, especially at the Bikini Atoll in 1946. But I'm blown. No pun intended. I'm blown away by this, Murd. I did not expect this in a Golden Age comic.
Yep. It's I have here in my hands Tomorrow Publications' Fawcett Companion, the best of the Fawcett collectors of America. There is a reproduced in this book one-page essay about this story, written back in 1996.
Wow,
it's kind of a standout in the Captain Marvel's Golden Age body of appearances. But yeah, no actual fictional characters were killed in this atomic. It was all just a simulation in the end. And we see that it's being watched by an all-American family, Mom and Dad and Junior and Sis gathered around their little TV, talking about how good it is of Station Whiz to put this on. And then Sis turns to Daddy and says, "Gee, Daddy, atomic wars would be really bad. We better not have one."
And again, what's fascinating is nobody else had the atomic bomb at this point. And the United States had hegemony, essentially, due to the fact that it was the only one that had the weapon at this point. But it's a very prescient story. I'm very impressed with that. Wow.
Once again, Fawcett shows their progressive streak. And as a backup story, much lighter in tone, the second appearance of Aunt Minerva, who just once again out hunting mans, and she's set her sights on Captain Marvel.
Is she like a Golden Age version of like a cougar? I mean, is she?
Yeah, she's like a silver cougar. She is downright old. I mean,
Silver foxy cougar.
She's got an inaccurate self-image. She sees herself as much younger than she really is, although her physical vitality, being able to beat up strong young men,
right. Yeah,
it's not too
Certainly
surprising that she feels that way. But in the course of her pursuit of Captain Marvel as her next husband, she does accidentally stumble across the reality that Billy Batson and Captain Marvel are one and the same. It's not a secret that Billy is ever at any pains to hide, as I think we mentioned in a couple of the earlier episodes. Usually he just says SHAZAM in front of everybody, and some magical quality of the lightning strike prevents most people from even realizing what has just happened. They're just like, oh, look, here's Captain Marvel, hooray! And they don't really put two and two together. But Aunt Minerva is a little shrewder than most, apparently, because she realizes that Billy and Cap are one and the same, and she uses that information against him in later appearances. Let's see. And then in Whiz Comics number 79, Cap goes to college. There's somebody is committing robberies on the campus of Cranmore College. So Cap enrolls as a freshman. He wears a dink. He's mobbed by co-eds. All the good college stuff.
So he goes as Captain Marvel, not as Billy.
Oh yes, okay. Yes. He just shows he's just auditing some classes. That's his cover. His cover for being there to try and catch the thief.
Does he wear a costume or street clothes?
Oh, he's in costume.
Of course.
With a dink. A dink is that silly little cap that college freshmen used to be forced to wear, by the way, kids. Do a Google image search. You'll see what I'm talking about.
They would wear those at the beginning of Animal House.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's right. Kind of an Animal Man situation. This is only like a few years before. What was that supposed to be, like 1950 something?
Animal House?
Yeah.
Early 60s.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So more like 15 or 20 years. Yeah. Anyway, the dinks were certainly in use in the mid-40s. Captain Marvel Adventures number 67 introduces a new supporting cast member. This was Joan Jameson, who comes on as the personal secretary and assistant to both Billy Batson and Captain Marvel. Her first appearance actually made the cover. It's a cover of it's an image of Captain Marvel carrying Ms. Jameson as he flies through the skies, and the caption says, Captain Marvel gets a secretary. And the story opens with Billy addressing the readers, saying, "Well, folks, here we're introduced to Joan Jameson, our new secretary. You'll be seeing a lot of her in future issues, so why don't we just tell you how she came to work for us?" And so in earlier stories, there had actually been a receptionist shown at the Station Whiz. Her name was Miss Dalshaw. And she looked exactly like Joan Jameson, just pretty and young with her hair done up on top of her head, as was fashionable at the time. But her hair was brown and Joan's was blonde. But I guess they decided they needed to go the extra mile and introduce a secretary who was specific to Billy and Cap and maybe milk some stories out of it. But in this first appearance of Joan Jameson, she's just gotten out of business college and she's ready to take the world by the horns, wants to get out there into the workforce and earn an honest living. Meanwhile, her roommate, whose name is Dina and is almost an exact physical double for Joan, is all She's all set to go out and find an easy plum job to do, long enough for her to marry some rich businessman and retire young. But Joan, she's the good worker bee. She goes out there to Station Wiz, where she wants to meet Captain Marvel and possibly work for him. And in the process, she accidentally learns the secret, not that, as I said, it's really much of a secret in the Fawcett universe, that Billy and Cap are one and the same person. And she volunteers she confronts Billy with the fact that she knows his secret and says, look, I can be of some help to you. I can help keep people away from you long enough for you to make the change from Billy to Cap in sensitive situations. And so she goes to work for him, and she impresses Billy and Cap. Cap is kind of against her coming to work there in the first place because, as we've said, he's kind of afraid of attractive women,
Right.
and he's afraid that she's going to try to climb in his lap and act all lovey-dovey. But she's all business, she's professional, impresses him with her professionalism, and so she's pretty sure she's got the job when she leaves for a lunch break, meets up with her roommate Dina and tells her of her good fortune. So Dina, being a bad apple, knocks out Joan, ties her up in their apartment, puts on one of Joan's dresses, fixes her hair like Joan's, so now she's like a clone of Joan, and goes in to work. It takes her place at Station Wiz office. She does a terrible job of being a receptionist. She's rude to visitors to the station and tries to climb in Captain Marvel's lap. Does everything wrong. And then later on, to add insult to injury, she calls up one of her criminal boyfriends, because of course she dates criminals,
Yes.
and calls him in to help her rob the station. But in the process,
Joan didn't realize what a ne'er-do-well she was rooming with?
apparently not. Just too apt to see the good in people, I guess. But Billy ends up bound and gagged in the same closet where Dina and her boyfriend
So
are
you can't
keeping
say
Joan.
Shazam.
Right. But Joan is in there, and she is able to remove Billy's gag with her teeth. And Billy then says Shazam, becomes Captain Marvel, and saves the day. And Joan Jameson has earned herself the job by this act of heroism. Billy
would
is
hope
very
so.
relieved to learn that all the nasty things that Dina were doing were not actually the doing of Joan, that Joan was the good professional person he thought she was. And so a supporting cast member is gained, although she almost never figures in any stories in the future after this. Somebody at Fawcett apparently thought she would be a player in the Captain Marvel mythos, but not so. In fact, in some stories in the future, they just kind of revert to using Miss Dalshaw again. But Joan Jameson was part of the Bronze Age revival. Apparently, E. Nelson Bridwell, or whoever was in charge of that, thought she was an important enough Golden Age Captain Marvel character that they brought her back in the 70s. Her first appearance was here. Okay. Then in the 6th issue of... Oh, never mind. Let's not even get into that. Captain Marvel Adventures number 68. We are now into 1947. This is a story in which a crooked mob lawyer has the bright idea to try and frame Captain Marvel for some of the crimes that his criminal client had committed and that Captain Marvel arrested him for committing. He does this PR smear campaign, and comic book public opinion being so very fickle, some people actually start to believe that Captain Marvel might have committed these crimes. But Captain Marvel's bailed out by one of the seemingly endless succession of crackpot scientists he always seems to meet, who has invented a new camera that can be used to take photographs of past events. Unfortunately, you need to be in outer space and moving at a very fast clip in order to make it work. So Captain Marvel, since he can fly at a very fast clip and travel into outer space, takes this camera and tests it by taking photographs of, the dates when these 4 crimes were committed to provide pictorial alibis for himself. And when he gets back down to Earth and has his day in court, he presents these photographs and they're images from actual past Captain Marvel comic stories. Like somebody did a little research and went back and saw what Captain Marvel was actually doing on these dates. And so it's a little bit like a comic book clip show. Yeah. As it has these images of past stories.
So, but they're also establishing a sense of continuity there, too.
Yeah. They were always pretty good about that at Fawcett, come to think of it. Not perfect. As we'll go along, I'll point out where they kind of ignore or forget about past stories.
All right, Mert, I have to comment on the next entry here.
Yes, also happening in Captain Marvel Adventures number 68.
A mishap at the dry cleaners forces Cap to fight crime in a musketeer costume, because you always have one of those handy, and nobody recognizes him.
Yes. The fact that he's this 6'6" muscular guy who looks like Fred McMurray isn't enough to identify him. No, he doesn't have the red suit. He's John Doe, as far as everybody's concerned. Okay.
Why did it have to be a musketeer costume? It's so great.
Look at this mook in the musketeer costume.
Silly. Okay, the 7th issue of Marvel Family. This is kind of an important milestone because the Marvel Family makes their first trip to the Rock of Eternity. We were introduced to it in Marvel Family #1. Now the Marvel Family themselves become aware of its existence. Shazam summons Mary, Cap, and Cap Jr. to the Rock of Eternity to help him recapture the personification of evil itself, who lives in a cave-like lair at the base of the Rock of Eternity. This is the only time in the Golden Age, I think, where you actually see the rock sitting on something, like a desert-like plain. The rest of the time, you only see it from a certain height, which is what leads future artists to assume that it's just like a two-ended, double-pointed rock floating in space. But in this story, since it's convenient, evil is imprisoned underneath the Rock of Eternity. It has just gotten loose. It's gotten its hands on Pandora's box, which Shazam keeps at the Rock of Eternity. It contains the Hornets of Trouble. And so evil naturally has evil ideas about how to use this box, and the Marvel Family has to track it down. But evil can split itself into 3 equally sized bodies. Okay, evil here... the 3 faces of evil were reintroduced in Jerry Ordway's Power of Shazam series. He visualized evil as a 3-headed dragon. But in the Golden Age, evil was just like this hairy troll-like thing. Like a hirsute covered with hair from top to head to toe with pointed wolf's ears. And it could split itself into 3 bodies: sin, terror, and wickedness. Those are the 3 faces. Because there are, after all, 3 Marvels, and each of them needed something to do in this story, so each of them took a face of evil and tracked it down and fought with it. And so that filled the space of an issue, just tracking down these 3 hairy evil things. They were then forced back into one body and hurled back under the Rock of Eternity, and Shazam assured the Marvel Family it would take another 1,000 years or so before evil re-marshaled the strength it would take to break free of its prison. So, hooray for the Marvel Family beating back evil itself. Captain Marvel 69 was a fun Christmas story. Captain Marvel and Billy helped to get the job back for a wrongfully terminated department store Santa. A little bit of human interest there. And afterwards, they go to a Christmas party where Mr. Morris dresses up as Santa, and everybody exchanges gifts. And Billy and Captain Marvel actually give presents to each other. Cap gives Billy a necktie.
Do they say Shazam and each appear to leave a gift for the other, basically?
Oh, yes, naturally.
Okay.
And all their friends are present, too.
Right.
So Cap gives Billy a necktie, and Billy gives Cap a set of tiddlywinks. Who is the adult in this partnership, really? Let's see. Whiz Comics number 82. This is another of Otto Binder's dalliances with atomic energy and its changing place in society. Captain Marvel has to clean up the mess created by one Professor Adam Atom and his atomic shop, which he opens to sell atomic-powered everyday merchandise and household goods. Everything from...
That sounds really safe.
Oh, yeah, of course. From toothpaste to breakfast cereal, infused with atomic energy, and chaos ensues. Mr. Morris, he has a toothache, so he takes an atomic-powered dental drop that cures the toothache, but then it melts the entire tooth away.
Boy.
And then Professor Atom's crooked nephew, Archie Atom, eats some atomic breakfast food and immediately quits his job sweeping floors at the atomic shop and goes out and knocks over a bank.
What I find interesting about this is if you ever study the Cold War or the era and informational films from that period, because I used to use some of that stuff in class over the years, this is not as far-fetched as it sounds. Because I've seen government training films where they say things about atomic energy that are so ludicrous.
Given what we know now.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one where, because this is in the 50s where the Soviets now have nuclear weapons as well. And they're talking about, I remember one quote, a submarine bomb may do some damage to a city. It'll be a poor picnic site. And, and then they're trying to equate a woman burning her hand on the stove or a man slipping in the shower with having to live with the possibility of a nuclear Armageddon. So it's just, this sounds absurd what we're reading here, but it works in the context because people didn't know a lot about the average person about what the power that had been unleashed by the United States here and what the ramifications of it. So I find this fascinating. Just these representations of atomic power.
Atomic power finding its way into households.
Yeah.
But as this story demonstrates, the world wasn't quite ready for it yet. They hadn't quite mastered the energy enough, and so the atomic shop has to be closed down. It's for the best. And Marvel Family number 8. From this point on, a frequent framing device for the beginning of Marvel Family stories is the Marvel Family Round Table. They decide to have their own round table discussion program on Wiz TV. And Uncle Marvel goes to a local antique store and buys a literal round table. And he's pursued then by this obsessive antique collector who will stop at nothing to own this table. And we learn by the end of the issue that this is because it used to belong to King Arthur. It is the actual round table of Arthurian myth. And
She found its way to an antique shop.
Yeah, in whatever city the Marvels live in. And from there it finds its way to Wiz TV, where it becomes the...
In the U.S.
Yes. And this is the round table around which the Marvel family sit for their little TV show for the rest of its...
Again, emphasizing, you mentioned earlier, that they're using the Wiz TV studio more and more. And again, because most Americans, TV doesn't go widespread American homes until the 50s, so it's interesting how they're really, again, they're progressive here in a lot of the material they're applying.
Oh, yep. Well, they're trying to be. Let's see. Okay. I mentioned earlier how at Fawcett the artists were fond of phrenology and making bad guys look wicked, deformed in some way. And I mentioned how the other shoe occasionally dropped as a result of this tendency. Well, in Captain Marvel Adventures number 70, we have one way of the Fawcett writing staff trying to redress this unfortunate tendency of theirs to associate physically unappealing specimens with unappealing moral positions. Like evil people don't have to be ugly. So in Captain Marvel Adventures number 70, Cap comes across John Doe, the unlikely villain.
John Doe.
Yes, and he's just this very nice-looking, handsome young man who couldn't possibly be a bad guy because he's just too darn nice and normal-looking. He looks honest, therefore he must be honest. But the fallaciousness of this is pointed up in this story. John Doe works at a bank, and he frames a coworker of his who is less attractive for committing a robbery that John Doe himself actually perpetrated. And everyone from the police up to Captain Marvel himself just automatically buys his story because he looks so honest and normal. But then the sister of the guy who was framed speaks up on his behalf and convinces Captain Marvel to dig deeper. And he discovers that John Doe is in fact a dirty crook, and he is immediately put in jail and the innocent man set free.
Now, you note here it may have been suggested to Fawcett by a concerned child psychologist.
Yes, I don't have any evidence whatsoever of that, but I do know that Marvel often blew their horn about how they employed an editorial review board consisting of people like child psychologists, and for a while
that could have been company propaganda.
They actually named Eleanor Roosevelt as a member of this editorial.
Really?
Yes. They listed the names of the people who were on
Okay.
it. I seem to recall there was a psychologist named Sidney Hughes.
Oh, maybe I stand corrected then. Maybe it was real.
Yeah. See,
Unless they just were taking people's names out
it
their
just
permission.
seemed like the kind of thing that a concerned someone along the lines of a Frederick Wortham,
I was
only
thinking
more
that, yeah.
reputable and credible, suggesting to Fawcett, you're sending negative messages here by having wizened, gnomish, ugly little people like Dr. Sivana represent evil in the world. Children reading these stories need to understand that evil comes in all forms. Not everyone who is ugly is a criminal, and not everyone who is attractive is honest. So this story helps to explode this misconception that some of Fawcett's other comics have helped to create.
Yeah.
So it's a...
And Murd, who is John Marble?
Oh.
Yeah, Marvel Family number 9.
Okay, yeah, this was a Captain Marvel solo backup story in Marvel Family. The average Golden Age Marvel Family comic usually consisted of a lead story that was Mary, Cap, and Billy, and often Uncle Marvel. As we heard in the story about the Round Table, Uncle Marvel obtained that. So he was kind of an honorary member of the Marvel Family for a while. He appeared in the first several issues of Marvel Family, but then they sort of phased him out, and by the second issue of the title's run, he just sort of disappeared from comics altogether. Uncle Marvel did. So there was a lead-off story featuring the Marvel Family United, a Mary solo story, a Junior solo story, and a Cap solo story. So 4 stories in all until towards the end of the Golden Age when Fawcett began downsizing the page counts in all their comics. But for the time being, in Marvel Family number 9, there was a Cap solo story. And in that solo story, Cap met John Marble, who is just a regular guy who was tormented by the fact that he looked exactly like Captain Marvel. Wherever he went, everyone mistook him for Captain Marvel, and when he tried to explain to them that his name was Marvel, they would be like, yeah, Marvel, that's what we said. So he couldn't even... Yeah. So finally, at his wit's end, he comes to the city and begs Captain Marvel for help. They try to stage a little public demonstration that will help people tell the difference, which fails utterly. In the end, John Marvel is forced to grow a beard. This is back in the days when beards were not fashionable. He writes a letter to Captain Marvel saying, "I have grown a beard. It itches like crazy, but I hate it less than being mistaken for you all the time." So there's the end of that man's story. Captain Marvel Adventures number 71, another appearance by the Lieutenant Marvels, as Captain Marvel agrees to appear at celebrations for the newly named Worldwide Captain Marvel Day celebration at world capitals around the world. I think there was going to be one in Washington, D.C., one in Moscow, one in Chongqing, and the other one in Europe someplace. I don't remember exactly where. But he couldn't be in 4 places at once, of course. So
the Soviets were going to celebrate Worldwide Captain Marvel Day?
Apparently.
All right.
Well, you said they hadn't developed the atomic bomb yet.
But,
so
I mean, it's hard to see Stalin being up there for Worldwide Captain Marvel Day anyway.
Hello, welcome, Captain Marvel.
I must break you. So anyway, the Lieutenant Marvels come and help. They each choose a city, and they do these appearances simultaneously. Meanwhile, Dr. Sivana, in his ultra-fast, instantaneous transit rocket ship, is determined to sabotage all 4 of these Captain Marvel Day celebrations, since he's determined that he's sure Captain Marvel can't be in 4 places at once, but thanks to the lieutenants, he can. And the story sort of helps to teach the young readers about international time zones, because Captain Marvel made these 4 appearance commitments because he didn't realize they all appear to be taking place at different times, but actually they were all taking place at the same time. Yeah. It just seemed like they were at different times because they were in different time zones. But by the end of the story, Sivana has been chased all the way around the world by the Marvels, and he was actually captured on Tuesday night when Captain Marvel Day was on a Wednesday. So he was actually captured the day before he committed his crimes.
Now, the Lieutenant Marvels, did they, I don't know what they looked like. Did they look just similar to Captain Marvel?
They all had defining physical features that made them look different from Captain Marvel himself. Actually, they were named after their physical appearances. Let's see, they were all named Billy Batson. That was the gimmick with the Lieutenant Marvels. They were apparently able to use the power of SHAZAM just because they happened to have the same name as Billy. But one of them was from Texas, and he was tall and lanky, so he was called Tall Billy Batson. There was a short, fat guy from Brooklyn, and so he was Fat Billy Batson. And then there was a redhead from the Ozarks someplace, and he was called Hillbilly Batson.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
From the Ozarks, no less.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, this is pretty close to the final appearance in the Golden Age for the Lieutenant Marvels, though. They kind of faded away, and Marion Jr. became Cap's new backup, his new family. Marvel Family number 10 is the first clash between the Marvel family and, in their first appearance as a threesome, the Sivana family. Sivana Jr., and Georgia Sivana. The Sivanas are after a radioactive isotope invented in ancient Atlantis, which they hope will contain enough energy to equal the charge in a blast of SHAZAM lightning, so they can then use it as a weapon against the Marvels. So, they use one of Sivana's inventions to travel backwards in time to ancient Atlantis to try and get their hands on some of this stuff. So, the Marvel family, at that point, learned that they have the capacity to travel through time. It's like a new addition to their power set, in essence. All they need to do is travel to the Rock of Eternity, which exists outside of time and space, after all, so it's an equal distance from every point on the space-time continuum. They just need to exceed the speed of light to get to eternity, then hang a Louie around the Rock of Eternity, and they can jump back into any timeline they want. And so they're able to pursue the Sivana family into the past, the present, and the future as they seek out different isotopes. As this ancient Atlantean element ages, it assumes different forms: protium, neutrium, and electrium. They needed to gather a sample of all 3 to make their big, fancy magic lightning weapon. So they manage to assemble this weapon, and they commit cold-blooded murder in doing so, incidentally. Just for those people out there who think that the Marvel comics, the Captain Marvel comics of the Golden Age were all sweetness and light and nobody ever died, the Sivanas commit murder in this story. Let it be known. But in the end, the Marvels do manage to foil them. And so this is the first time the Sivana family and the Marvel family met. And also the first time the Marvels time traveled through the Rock of Eternity, something they would do many, many times in years to come. Jumping ahead to Captain Marvel Adventures number 73. This is kind of a silly story. The origin of the bolts of magic lightning that turn the Marvels into the Marvels, it varies from story to story. Sometimes it's said that Shazam himself sends the lightning. Other times, Zeus, who after all provides the power of Zeus to Cap and Junior, throws the lightning bolts. He's kind of famous for doing that in mythology, after all. In Captain Marvel Adventures number 73, Zeus has a sore shoulder that throws off his aim in throwing those magic lightning bolts, so he tends to miss Billy Batson when he says Shazam, and instead he turns random bystanders into Captain Marvel. And not even like Captain Marvel versions of the people whom the lightning has struck, which is what happens with the Lieutenant Marvels, after all. But they're turned into adult Billy Batsons. They're turned into Billy's version of Captain Marvel. It's all just kind of a silly ruse to... It's kind of like one of those Silver Age deals where an editor like Mort Weisinger would come up with a cover gimmick and task his writers to write a story under it. I think that's probably what happened with this story. Somebody wanted Captain Marvel and Billy Batson to be able to meet and interact in a single story. And so they came up with this silly concept of Zeus missing with his lightning bolts and turning other people into Billy's version of Cap so that Billy and Cap can meet. Okay. Towards the end of the story, the conflict in the story is just a generic gangster that Cap is trying to round up. At one point, the gangster is hit with one of these magic lightning bolts, and he's turned into Captain Marvel, who, of course, promptly volunteers to be tied up so that when he's turned back into the gangster, he'll be subdued and ready to be delivered to jail.
That's convenient.
Oh, that is silly. And that's not even the cover story of this issue. The cover story for CMA number 73 was Captain Marvel becomes a petrophile.
That's weird.
They actually had to put a little asterisk on there, leading to a little footnote at the bottom of the cover saying rock lover. Making sure people understand that's what petrophile means.
I'm surprised that they took the risk to put that on the cover and make an asterisk. Why not just put something else?
Yep.
Rock lover.
Fawcett Comics
just trying to encourage vocabulary growth.
Well,
they published where eagles dared.
I'll give you that.
Yeah, so the story was really about Captain Marvel obtaining a hobby. It's just something for him to do when he's not fighting crimes.
Sure.
And he decides to collect rocks. Yeah. And so he becomes a petrophile.
But I'll tell you, from here, looking at that at first, I'm like, a pedophile? What? Okay, that's weird. No, that's not right.
It is a little strange. It's
not a word in common parlance, though, in
no,
the
not
1940s.
at all.
It's the kid in him, I guess. Well, after all, Billy Batson dated Sissy Summerlee, Mr. Morris's niece. So I guess if you consider that Billy and Cap are the same person, a case could be made. And I'm sure if the Sivanas had caught wind of that, they would have made that case against Captain Marvel to have him locked up for that. Let's see. Whiz Comics number 86. Captain Marvel fights all three Sivanas single-handedly and, of course, defeats them fairly handily. I mean, the best they can really do, the three of them, is just kind of distract him long. So it's kind of a relay race. One of them does something rotten. Cap cleans up their mess, and he just gets after them when the next Sivana does something else rotten. And so the Sivanas don't really get anywhere. All they're doing is keeping him distracted. And in the end, they take flight pills in that story so that all the Sivanas get to fly, but then make the mistake of attempting to pull the same crime together at the same time, and Captain Marvel's able to corral them all and defeat them. And in Marvel Family number 12, this is the Cap solo story in that issue. Old wizard Shazam summons Captain Marvel back in time to help the Greek hero Odysseus, called by his Roman name Ulysses in this story. In Homer's Odyssey, when Odysseus comes home to Ithaca, he has to help his son Telemachus drive a bunch of boorish suitors out of his house. They've been hanging around trying to marry Odysseus' wife Penelope for years. So Odysseus has to clean house when he gets home. In this story, he is too weak to fight them all off himself, so he goes to a local temple and calls on the gods' assistance. And Shazam hears his call and summons his champion Captain Marvel back in time to fight alongside Odysseus and Telemachus, clearing the house of all these nasty suitors. So this is, since Captain Marvel's always been kind of indirectly tied to classical mythology, it's kind of cool to have a story where he goes back in time and actually plays a part in an actual Greek myth.
Yeah.
Let's see. Now in Whiz Comics number 87.
Bring in the Roman gods here.
Yeah, they mixed pantheons very indiscriminately. I mean, just look at the acronym SHAZAM. You've got Zeus and Mercury together in the same spot.
Yeah, very true.
And now in Wiz Comics number 87, more of that pantheonic miscegenation that Chris was just talking about. The god Mars is introduced as an antagonist. The story begins as a member of a cult-like group or possibly a political movement called the Society of Mars is going around trying to assassinate well-known advocates of peace, academics, writers, things like that. And Captain Marvel is noticing a pattern. And but as he's in the middle of trying to investigate this strange dilemma, stray lightning bolts start striking Earth, and he intercepts a meteor that's about to strike Earth, which is actually the wheel of a... Oh, no, wait. No, never mind. I'm thinking of a different story. I'm muddling.
All right, Murray. There's plenty to go through here.
I'm muddling myself. Okay. Anyway, Captain Marvel somehow traces this wrongdoing of this man who calls himself a member of the Society of Mars. He goes up to Olympus and. Okay. Now I remember what tipped him off that something really funny is going on. He says Shazam, nothing happens, and then 10 minutes later, a lightning bolt finally comes down. This tells him that something is amiss in Mount Olympus. So he travels to Olympus, since Captain Marvel can do that, and sees what's going on with his patron deities up there. And it turns out that they're quarreling among themselves, because apparently Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury, the three gods at the tail end of the Shazam acronym, are tired of being second bananas, tired of playing the wrong end of the horse, as it were. And they want the acronym, they want top billing. They want the magic acronym to be changed to Zamsha. Silly thing to argue about. But the reason they're being so unreasonable, it later turns out in the story, is that they have been poisoned by Mars himself with his nectar of discord. He's been poisoning their godly nectar, and they've been drinking it and succumbing to conflict. And Mars's ultimate plan is to, sideline Captain Marvel with all of this, and then take advantage of the confusion to get down there, help his society to foment war and conflict on Earth. But Captain Marvel exposes him, and the gods return to their normal selves. Zeus stops demanding top billing.
Once again, I'm impressed. It just seems like Foss is again trying to insert some sort of social commentary here, within this story. Mm-hmm. Was that your impression because you actually read it, or
it was? Yeah, it seemed like it was a very sort of veiled allegory for a comment on post-war world leadership and their inability to agree on certain issues.
Wow.
So that's I'm kind of hoping that that's what the writers had in mind.
And if that's true, quite ahead of its time, or prolific. Prophetic?
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 Or prophetic.
Prophetic. Yeah. In trying to tell stories like that.
All right, that same month, which was August of 1947, same month my dad was born, actually, in an issue of Captain Marvel Jr., number 52. Major status quo change for Jr. I'm mentioning it here because it would eventually have repercussions for Captain Marvel himself. Freddie Freeman, the alter ego of Captain Marvel Jr., a lame newsboy, always walked with a crutch. Prior to this, he'd always been shown just living in a tumble-down apartment someplace. Some artists drew it to look like in a condemned building, actually, living all by himself. But in this story, he apparently somebody at Fawcett thought he needed a healthier home life. So we see Freddie being reassigned by his news dealer, since he works as a newsboy, to a new part of town. So he has to leave his old apartment and find a new place to live, and he finds a home at a boarding house run by kindly old Mrs. Wagner. And in so doing, he acquires a whole a new setting and a new supporting cast. Mrs. Wagner herself and a few other people who rent apartments there. There's Leroy Marks, who's a traveling salesman and a kind of an incorrigible practical joker. There's Officer Jim Bellows, the local beat cop. There's Red O'Reilly, who runs a local filling station. He has an Irishman's temper and a workingman's appetite.
How could he not with that name?
Mm-hmm. And Professor Edgewise, who's the archetypal, kooky, absent-minded professor. He's kind of a redux version of Professor Edgewise Smith, who had been a supporting character of the Captain Marvel comics of the early Golden Age. Okay. These all become junior supporting cast, and at the very, very end of the Golden Age, they also become Captain Marvel supporting cast, as we will eventually see. All right. Let's jump ahead a little bit here. Wiz Comics number 89. Captain Marvel encounters Spider-Man. But not the Spider-Man. No, this is just a character who actually appeared in the recently published Legion of Regrettable Supervillains book. So he's just a guy in a hairy black costume. He looks a little bit like Spider-Man's enemy, the Vulture, Adrian Toomes. He's older, and he carries what kind of looks like a giant cake icer under his arm. It's got a nozzle at the end of it. It's full of liquid plastic, and he just kind of does armpit farts on it to generate these giant plastic webs that he captures people in.
Esmerd very expertly demonstrates that for us.
Yes, there was a visual dimension to that I'm afraid those of you listening at home are deprived of. Sorry. But yeah, he's spider-themed, and he commits robberies this way. And at some point in the story, he learns Billy's dual identity. Of all people to learn. More bad guys know about this than friends of Billy's, I swear.
It sure seems it.
Yeah, but Captain Marvel puts him away in the end, and Spider-Man is not heard of again until 1962. And then that same month, in Marvel Family number 15, the three Marvels come up against a three-themed villain named Mr. Triangle. Now, this is one of the more interesting character finds I made while reading all these Marvel Family comics of the Golden Age. He's a con man. He's kind of like a cross between Two-Face and the Golden Age Angle Man who fought Wonder Woman, who's just kind of like this snappily dressed crook who always had an angle on things.
Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't like obsessed with triangles or anything, or at least not at first. He had an angle on every crime. And so this Mr. Triangle. The story doesn't make a big deal of it, but all the crimes he commit are related to the number 3. So if he were ever brought back by a writer at some point, they could probably play that up a little bit, kind of like Two-Face's obsession with number 2. He poses as triplets. His name is actually Psy Triangle. That's his family name. He pretends to have 2 brothers. Ty Triangle, who is a crook like Psy, and High Triangle, who is just this innocent model citizen. And so Psy has this brilliant idea on arriving in this new city to pose as these triplets, commit a bunch of crimes as 2 of the triplets, and then retreat into his innocent secret identity of the third triplet, High Triangle. The Marvel family, of whom there are 3 also, pretty quickly get wise to this ruse of his and bring him to justice. His head is kind of triangular in shape, too. So. Then, November of 1947 saw Captain Marvel Adventures number 78 and the introduction of a fairly important new opponent for Captain Marvel. C.C. Beck later reported that certain editors at Fawcett were not that fond of Dr. Sivana as Captain Marvel's recurring nemesis.
Really?
Because, well, he was just this short little guy. He just had a lot of malice in a small body. So he was a great character, but he wasn't exactly a physical equal for Captain Marvel, even with his many scientific devices.
Right.
So they wanted somebody who could tussle with Captain Marvel on his own physical level. So one step in that direction was definitely taken in November of 1947 with the introduction of Mr. Atom. All right, now this Mr. Atom was a robot. He was a 10-foot-tall atomic robot who gained a form of simulated life in an atomic energy experiment performed by one Dr. Charles Langley, Mr. Atom's inventor. He was bound and determined to be the first person to instill a sort of life force in an artificial being, and so he built this kind of unnecessarily large and powerful robot whose head just happened to be shaped like the nose cone of an atomic bomb, and instilled life force in it. And, of course, there was this massive explosion which nearly killed Dr. Langley as it gave life to his creation. And Mr. Atom is sown wandering around trying to find his purpose in life, and eventually comes to the conclusion that his purpose in life is to destroy and to dominate, and whatever, resolves to conquer the human race. And it appears before the United Nations and states its intention to do exactly that. The United Nations was pretty central to a lot of Captain Marvel stories since it was a novelty back then, after all.
Well, it had only been introduced a few years prior.
Mm-hmm. So Captain Marvel, of course, mobilizes and goes toe-to-toe with Mr. Atom, and he does Mr. Atom the compliment of referring to him as, quote, the toughest opponent I've ever faced. And physically, that's probably the truth.
Does Mr. Atom look like a robot, or does he have like a human visage?
A little of each.
Okay.
He kind of looks like a cartoon version of a robot. He has eyes, a nose, and a mouth. But they don't exactly... can you get the who's who there, Shane? The blue volume right there. Yeah. I think Mr. Atom actually had his own entry. But yeah, he's kind of somewhat comical looking, as most Captain Marvel characters of the Golden Age were. But he was still formidable in that he was so powerful, and he fought Captain Marvel nearly to a standstill. But at the end, the two of them simultaneously decide to rear back and put all they had left into one massive punch.
Oh yeah,
see, something like a face.
So almost like a bullet.
yeah.
Well, yeah, that's it's supposed to look like the tip of a missile. Yeah, like as in an atomic bomb. It was similar to Captain Nazi before him. He's meant to be a personification of a major, a source of paranoia or concern to the public, and therefore to the readership of this comic book. So yeah, he's he's personifying atomic proliferation and unchecked scientific progress, which are things that certain people were worried about in the 40s.
10 feet tall, weighs 1,214 pounds, eyes photocellular, and no hair.
Right. That's Mr. Atom to a T. Yes, Mr. Atom is he actually narrates his first appearance. So we are sort of left to assume that he survives his first appearance from Go, because he's telling it in past tense. You all know who I am. I am Mr. Atom.
Is that how he speaks?
He speaks in his word balloons are kind of jagged, like they're crackling with static. Just like a lightning bolt shooting out of the rims of these word balloons of his. But yeah, he's narrating the whole thing. And at the end of the story, we learn that he's narrating it from a special 20-foot thick lead-walled holding cell that Captain Marvel has built for him in the American desert. He ends by saying this is, "You will not hear from me again after the end of this broadcast, but beware, human world. I remain." And I don't remember his exact wording, but he was telling people not to count him out yet, in essence. So he was still alive at the end of that story, and the implication was clearly that he would be making a comeback.
And is he brought back in the Bronze Age as well?
Yes.
I figure this is in Who's Who.
Oh, yeah. He had 2 more appearances in the Golden Age, too. So that's any time a character made more than one appearance in Captain Marvel's Golden Age, it's worth talking about. But yeah, this is a character that was definitely born of the fears, phobias, concerns of the time. He was just kind of a boogeyman figure, and he was Captain Marvel's physical equal. So and then the fact that he was inhuman and kind of somewhat dispassionate. He was kind of emotional as robots go. He laughed. He indulged in wicked laughter from time to time, but he's a different kind of enemy for Captain Marvel, and I'm glad that he was introduced. And in the very next issue of Captain Marvel Adventures, this is number 79, cover dated December of 47, saw the first appearance of one of the best known and best loved supporting characters of Captain Marvel's mythos, Mr. Tawny, the Talking Tiger. Now, this character was especially beloved of his creator, Otto Binder, who saw Mr. Tawny as an alter ego of sorts for him. He and C.C. Beck actually tried to shop around a Mr. Tawny syndicated newspaper strip, but couldn't find any takers for it. He saw Mr. Tawny as, in Otto Binder's eyes, he was a societal outsider who was trying to find his way in modern human civilization. And so he was kind of like an ideal vehicle for social satire, which is the kind of story that Otto Binder enjoyed telling through the Captain Marvel comics. So in number 79 of Captain Marvel Adventures, we're introduced to Mr. Tawny. He's sitting around in the jungle with his only companion, a hermit. He's in the African jungle, and the two of them are just conversing. The hermit is trying to talk Mr. Tawny out of visiting North American civilization, and Tawny says, no, but the hermit is apparently an American. And Tawny says, no, you've told me about things like clothes and movies and ice cream cones. I want to see all those things. So Tawny stows away on a steamer and shows up in whatever city Captain Marvel lives in, and he just kind of walks around on his hind legs saying hello to people, and they all scream and run away, which confuses him a little. He helps himself to free food here and there, and eventually he's captured, knocked out, and put in the zoo. Which hurts his feelings pretty badly.
People are aware of the fact that he talks, I assume.
Actually, most people are too busy screaming hysterically to notice that he's talking to them. Even if he talks to them first before they notice him. One person, he asks for directions, and the guy says, oh, yeah, you just go down Clover Street, and it's a tiger. and immediately forgets that he was talking to this tiger a minute ago. He just sees tiger and runs and screams. But Captain Marvel is eventually... Tawny escapes from the zoo, and Captain Marvel is called in to corral him again, and Tawny manages to get a word in edgewise and convinces Captain Marvel that he means nobody any harm. He just wants to enjoy civilization on the same terms that humans do.
Does he have powers?
He's intelligent. So that's a super tiger power,
Okay,
I guess.
yeah.
He can speak. That's about, and he can walk on his hind legs as well as any human being can. But that's about it. Other than that, he's got the proportionate strength and speed of a tiger. Yes, but with Captain Marvel's help, he quickly becomes the best-dressed bipedal feline in all of the city. As he's always dressed in the latest fashions. He favors the color green for some reason. It just kind of accentuates his natural colors, I guess, the orange and the black stripes. But he's always shown wearing these very sharp suits and hats. And Captain Marvel even gets him a job at the local Natural History Museum as a docent. And so Captain Marvel gains a new friend, and Mr. Tawny becomes a regular in Captain Marvel adventures. He appears in over 20 backup stories.
Bender
in Captain
clearly
Marvel.
loved the character.
Oh, yes, a lot. And he all but made Captain Marvel a supporting character in his own title for a little while there.
Now, was Tawny brought back in the Bronze Age?
Yes.
Okay.
He's got his own entry in Who's Who,
All right.
actually. So, yes. And, so, like, just about every version of Captain Marvel we see from then on, and it tends to involve a tiger in some way or another. Usually the tiger is mystical, but Mr. Tawny was not. We'll get to his origin in a little bit here. So, yeah, that's the first appearance of Mr. Tawny. But other cool things going on in Captain Marvel Adventures number 73. Another Aunt Minerva story. Billy Batson hires the world's worst actor, Elroy P. Fauntleroy, to work at Wiz on television. And Captain Marvel goes on a time travel adventure back to ancient Egypt when he finds an ancient papyrus scroll dug up from a city that was buried in a sandstorm.
But no Black Adam.
No.
Right? Okay.
No. He goes back in time because this papyrus claims that SHAZAM robbed and pillaged back in the days of ancient Egypt. And Billy asks the old wizard himself about this, but SHAZAM encourages him to go back in time and find the truth for himself. So Captain Marvel goes back and discovers that indeed SHAZAM was framed, like an imposter committed those crimes. But Captain Marvel catches up with the imposter, forces him to etch a confession on a gold shield. And then Captain Marvel then plans to bury. He buries it, and then centuries later he goes back and shows archaeologists where to find it, and SHAZAM's good name is cleared.
Of course.
So, good stuff happening there. And one other thing that happened in the same month, in Whiz Comics number 92, you might appreciate this, Chris. The story was called The Land of Opportunity, and it's narrated by Old Man Opportunity himself. And it's a story of like the post-war landscape of America. It's a couple of drifters, kind of like Dust Bowl figures, a little out of place in 1947. But they're walking around in this post-war world trying to figure out what to do with themselves. They come across an old ghost town. And they find the deed to the ghost town, so they're automatically the owners of it. And they're like, oh, wow, let's go around and see if we can find any scraps of gold or oil or whatever this town was founded to dig out of the ground. Billy Batson happens to be riding behind his bicycle at that point, and he sees these two guys poking around in these structurally unsound old buildings trying to find gold nuggets or whatever. And he turns into Captain Marvel to try and save their lives. And he spends the rest of the story chasing them back and forth, trying to explain to them that they're going about profiting by this acquisition of theirs all wrong. He's too busy protecting them from structurally unsound buildings. Finally, he gets them to stand still long enough to tell them, look, this is not an oil or gold boomtown anymore. The real value here is the land. You guys have this deed. You have this plot of land now. It's 1947. GIs are coming home from the war. They're starting families. There's a housing shortage in the United States right now. Develop the land and sell it as a suburban land development, and people will beat a path to your door. And so it's kind of a moral for the post-war times.
That fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So, like a early commercial for the growth of suburbia.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Because this couldn't have been too far away from the city because Billy was able to get there by bike. So, yeah, naturally. People would want to have homes out there. All right, continuing on into 1948 as we bid a fond off-mic farewell to the glorious cardiganed personage of Chris Eberly, who has had to return home to New Jersey. It's kind of a long drive, and it's late here
It is a long drive.
Pennsylvania. So we salute you, Chris. Thank you very much for being here to be part of this magical Marvel tour. All right, so January 1948, Captain Marvel Adventures number 80. That saw the first of several ill-advised attempts on Dr. Sivana's part to try to undo Captain Marvel by traveling back in time to get him at his point of origin. He tried that a few different times, and he always failed in different ways. So in this case, he tried going back in time to Cap's origin and got swept up in the time stream so that he just all memory of anything that happened after February of 1940 was wiped out of his mind, and he just he sort of merged with his past self and was forced to relive the events of Cap's origin story. So it's kind of a retelling of Captain Marvel's origin story with Sivana, playing his part in it, threatening to destroy all radio, and Captain Marvel showing up and foiling him. So,
but at the time, he didn't realize he was thrown back into it.
Right, he didn't realize he was reliving something that had already happened.
Okay,
so. And in the end, he somehow ends up back in his time capsule and going back to the future and realizing that he wasted a trip.
Okay.
But just goes to show you, those who go back in time to try to wreck Captain Marvel's past are doomed to repeat it. Also that month in Whiz Comics number 93, Captain Marvel becomes a hobo. See, this is a story that's got me excited for the upcoming Image Comics series Rock Candy Mountain, which takes a look at the subculture of hobodom. Because Captain Marvel had to infiltrate that world in this story. See, Captain Marvel saves a woman and her daughter from a fire. He can't find the man of the house, and the mother tearfully tells Captain Marvel that before he settled down and got married, her husband had been a hobo, rode the rails and all that. And he probably, mad with grief, ran off and dove right back into that lifestyle when he thought his wife and daughter had died. So Captain Marvel then has to learn the ways of the hobo in order to, penetrate this American demimonde of the rail riding vagrant and track down this man and bring him back to his family again. So it displays a little bit of superficial knowledge on the writer's part of hobo lingo and culture. Hopefully, Rock Candy Mountain will dig a little deeper into that.
Sure.
Captain Marvel Adventures number 81 is the return of Mr. Atom. He allies himself with some aliens called the Comet Men, and together with them battle Captain Marvel and lose, of course. And the comet that the Comet Men use as their home base and mothership explodes. And both they and Mr. Atom appear to be destroyed, but this is comics and we know better. Mr. Atom will appear one more time in the Golden Age after that. Marvel Family number 20, a story called The Marvel Family Feud. Now, Marvel Family stories in the Golden Age, for a while, were that the writers were experimenting with different permutations of the theme of family as things to give the Marvel family different things to do. And this time, the family involved is a family known as the Krug clan from the Ozarks region, supposed to be modeled on the Hatfields and the McCoys.
Sure.
The Krugs are professional feuders, and as the story begins, they've just about wiped out the last member of the family with whom they're currently feuding, and they need to find a new feuding partner. So they ask their granny to rack her memory to try and come up with somebody else who may have offended the family once. And she recalled a fellow by the name of Batson, who once quarreled with her grandpappy about the weather, some 80 years ago.
About the weather.
Yes. He said the weather was nice, and her grandpappy said it was going to rain, and promptly shot the Batson down for arguing with him. And so they demanded satisfaction, did the Krugs, and they headed out to the city to try and find Billy Batson to feud with him. This is hillbilly humor, which is a little bit objectionable in modern times.
Sure.
Not as much so as some of the portrayals of, say, Native Americans, as I've mentioned earlier. But it's a little disturbing because the Krugs go around actually murdering people throughout the city. It's very dark humor. At one point, Mary Marvel actually captures one of the Krugs and puts him over her knee and spanks him. So there's that theme again.
Okay.
And when they finally round up the Krugs, putting an end to their killing spree and lock them up in a prison, it turns out that the warden is a lost family member of the last family they'd been feuding with.
Okay.
So it ends on a very dark note as the prison warden's life is clearly in danger from these crazy hillbillies that are locked up in his prison. Also in that issue, a story called The Mistake of Father Time, in which Father Time stops and takes a nice little rest on a cloud and accidentally sets his hourglass down upside down, so time runs backward. So part of the story is told in reverse.
Oh, wow.
Interesting little experiment in sequential art.
Yeah.
And Captain Marvel gets a second chance to save some lives that he didn't get to save the first time around. Captain Marvel Adventures number 82. Mr. Tawny comes back. And this time we learn his origin story. Now, the story opens with Captain Marvel coming upon what seems to be an open and shut smoking gun murder case. A young man named Tom Todd is found holding a smoking gun over the dead body of his boss. He insists that he just found the gun and picked it up without thinking. And something in Captain Marvel tells him that the young man is telling the truth, but at the same time, Cap knows that he's going to have to testify against this guy in court, and it will probably condemn him to death. So Billy then shows up at Mr. Tawny's house later that night. He had promised to hang out with him that night. And he's muttering to himself about poor Tom Todd and how he's probably going to be convicted of murder. And Mr. Tawny says, "What, Tom Todd? You saw my old friend Tom Todd?" And then he launches into an account of his origin story. Mr. Tawny was originally just a little orphan tiger cub living in the jungle, and Tommy Todd was the son of a missionary who was there in that same jungle to minister to the natives. And Tommy adopted this little tiger cub and took him to school with him. And the little tiger absorbed a knowledge of English. Apparently he was a brighter than average tiger. And eventually, when the tiger was full grown, the local children were turning up murdered, mauled by a tiger. Okay. Like they were being killed by a tiger. And everybody, of course, blamed Tommy Todd's pet tiger. So the two of them had to flee. They came across a hermit living in the jungle who provided this is the same hermit who was seen at the beginning of Mr. Tawny's first story, who tried to talk Mr. Tawny out of venturing into civilization. This hermit provided Mr. Tawny with an herbal elixir he'd been working on that could enhance the cerebral capacity of animals and enhance their vocal cords to let them speak English. He gives it to Mr. Tawny, and Mr. Tawny is instantly able to speak, since he's absorbed English by attending classes with his little master. And he tells Tommy, "I'm definitely not guilty of these murders. But now that I can talk to you, maybe you and I can hunt down the real killer together." So Tommy helps Mr. Tawny hunt down the tiger who's really been killing the native kids, clears Mr. Tawny's name. And then Tommy and his missionary father go back to the United States. And Mr. Tawny doesn't see him again. And now, back to the present, he and Captain Marvel go, they together are able to round up the man who really killed Tommy Todd's boss. And they are able to acquit Tommy. So, just as Tommy helped clear Mr. Tawny's name all those years ago in the jungle, Mr. Tawny returns the favor to Tommy Todd, and the two of them are joyfully reunited.
But does it say how Mr. Tawny came over from the jungle he was in?
Oh, yeah, in his first appearance, they told us that. He's sitting there with the hermit, and the hermit's like, "Yeah, you don't want to go to civilization. People are no good."
That's right.
But Mr. Tawny wants to have ice cream cones. So he hops aboard a steamer and shows up in the United States, and Captain Marvel helps him to integrate into society, and that's where we are.
Yeah, I remember you talk about the ice cream cones. Now you say that part.
Well, of course, I'd be the ice cream cones would be the first thing I remember too. It's actually sounding pretty good right now. I think I'm going to have one when I get home. Okay, and also in that same issue, Dr. Sivana and Aunt Minerva team up against Captain Marvel. Aunt Minerva actually uses a narcotic perfume to make Sivana. Well, she was going to use it on Captain Marvel, but Sivana happened to be present at. Minerva sneaked into Billy's apartment to try and get him to change into Captain Marvel so that she could make Marvel fall in love with her. But Dr. Sivana was there to murder Billy in his sleep at the same time. So the two of them ended up as a couple, and Aunt Minerva's not that picky, really. She'll take whatever man flesh is willing to endure her presence. So the two of them form a power couple briefly, but then Captain Marvel punches Dr. Sivana and he comes to his senses, and he and Minerva fight like cats and dogs for the rest of the story. And the two of them are put in jail, and they're still screaming and swearing at each other. Happy ending. Captain Marvel Adventures number 83. It's kind of a trendsploitation story. It's called Captain Marvel Cuts a Rug, in which Mr. Morris's niece, Ellen, who's a teenager, a swing kid, one of the hip generation, comes to visit, and Billy is assigned, and eventually Captain Marvel is assigned with chaperoning her around while Mr. Morris brokers a land deal for a site to build a new whiz signal tower. And Billy and this obnoxious little teenage swing kid who keeps spouting incomprehensible hep lingo all over the place get into misadventures and accidentally discover that the plot of land that Mr. Morris is trying to buy is all quicksand. So they're able to do Uncle Morris a good turn there. But at the end, Cap says, "Well, okay, since the deal's been brokered, here's your niece back. Bye." Because he can't wait to get away from her. And Mr. Morris is like, "You can't leave me like this." So, yeah, it's kind of an embarrassing send-up of the youth culture of the mid-40s, definitely from an adult outsider's perspective. But, of course, Fawcett had just published a jive dictionary about 2 years earlier, so whoever wrote this story probably made use of that in writing it. And then that same month, an interesting tale in Marvel Family number 22. It's the Cap solo story from that issue. He fights a bad guy called the Radioactive Man. No relation to the green-skinned communist Chinese person from Marvel Comics about 20 years later. He's just a common crook.
Nor the Simpsons guy much, much later.
Oh, yes, definitely no relation to Claude Kane III either. Nope, this is just a common bruiser who's on death row. But instead of being executed, he's offered the chance to be a guinea pig for experiments. And so he allows some scientists to feed him little doses of radioactive radium salts to see if he can build up an immunity to them. Not only does he, but his body becomes energized with radiation. His hair all falls out, and he burns his clothes away. He has to be put in a special lead suit. But he gains the ability to project bolts of radiation that can cause people to spontaneously combust. He's a fire starter now. He can just burn people down, as he puts it, where they stand. He does it to the scientists who made him this way, and then he goes on a killing spree, killing every cop he comes across. Captain Marvel is able to bring him down, though, by disguising himself as a cop and then allowing Radioactive Man to unsuccessfully try to burn him. And then the two of them kind of war for a while until Radioactive Man burns out his supply of radiation. And so then he's put back in prison. The suggestion is he could be brought back at any time. He doesn't die at the end of the story. But presumably if he ate some more of those salts, he could be Radioactive Man all over again.
Well, and the funny thing that made me kind of smirk here is it's Cap versus Radioactive Man of Earth S, and all of a sudden I went Radioactive Man of the Simpsons world. Okay.
Yeah, that would have been a good story,
Just
too. Since
a little bit clever.
Yeah, there are certain similarities between the two. You know, the red suits and the lightning bolt, although Cap's isn't lodged in his head.
Yeah, just completely coincidental that he's on Earth S.
Yeah. Let's see. In Marvel Family number 23, then, the Sivana Family launch a propaganda smear campaign against the Marvel Family by, they hijack a major newspaper. They make it look like the owner has committed suicide and deeded the whole thing to them. But they're thwarted by the publisher's nephew, who reveals that he couldn't have shot himself because his arm is lame from an old injury, and so it's kind of an odd story, and once again, it shows the fickleness of public opinion in a comic book universe.
Sure.
But the backup story is really more interesting because, again, it's Captain Marvel versus kind of a prototypical version of a Marvel character. It's Cap versus Thor of a sorts on Earth S. This Thor is actually A.H. Thor, blacksmith. And this is a blacksmith in 1948, mind you. There wasn't that much call for blacksmiths by then because the automobile had pretty much taken over.
Sure.
So he's sitting there in his poor, deserted little shop, feeling sorry for himself and feeling a growing hatred and resentment of the automobile. So finally he resolves to use an ancient secret handed down from his family from the time of his ancient ancestor, the god Thor. And he forges his own mystic hammer. And this hammer, when thrown, will cause anything it strikes to explode in a discharge of magical lightning, and then the hammer just hops right back to the hand of its thrower, just like as seen in the Marvel comics and in the Norse myths before that.
Sure.
So A.H. Thor goes on a rampage throughout the city, destroying every car he comes across. He comes to an auto show eventually, really goes to town there. Billy Batson happens to be there covering it for Station Whiz. And he fights Thor as Captain Marvel, but then he gets struck by Thor's hammer, and the magic lightning it gives off is apparently similar enough to the Shazam lightning. It turns Cap back into Billy, and Thor is able to get away. So they go after each other a couple more times after that, and Thor is able to turn Cap back into Billy and capture him and take him back to his blacksmith shop where he plans to finish him off. But he does so by trying to strike him with the hammer, which just creates more magic lightning, which turns him back into Captain Marvel. Cap punches Thor out, and the final panel of the story is Cap melting down Thor's hammer in Thor's own forge. So that's a pretty cool story. I admit, technophobe that I am, there are times when I wish I had a magic hammer like that I could use to destroy every smartphone and tablet I come across, annoying as I find those things. So there you go, Cap versus Thor of Earth S. Captain Marvel Adventures number 85, June of 1948. This is another issue-length story, a novelette, as they call it. And it's called Captain Marvel and the Freedom Train. It's a timely story, and it's kind of a giant promotional ad for the traveling patriotic exhibition of the same name. It's like a museum of patriotic documents and relics, important things from American history in like an Amtrak train that circled the United States between 1947 and 49.
Wow.
So Fawcett's giving it a bit of publicity in this story,
Sure.
in which Dr. Sivana attempts to destroy the Freedom Train, thinking that in so doing he would symbolically destroy freedom. He's thwarted not only by Captain Marvel, but by an FBI agent and a recently returned home Marine. So Cap sharing the glory with other American heroes there. Sivana just says, bah, and then spends the rest of this issue-length story traveling through time, trying to destroy American freedom at its roots by going back in time and stealing important historical documents and replacing them with documents of his own. Like replacing the Declaration of Independence with his Declaration of Dictatorship, for example. So it's just a crazy little time chase story after that. And at the end of the story, there's the last page is a little quote-unquote freedom pledge saying, I am an American citizen and I want to uphold the values of freedom and and the idea the kid was supposed to, the reader of the comic is supposed to sign this little freedom pledge, cut it out, and mail it in to Fawcett.
Huh.
I have no idea why.
Yeah, not without some kind of like certificate to come back to you.
Yeah.
Strange.
I don't know if there were any kind of free... It didn't say anything about a promotion or a prize that you'd get if you did this.
Huh.
Or if it would put your name on a mailing list, or if the FBI would take you off its persons of interest list if you did.
Yeah.
It beats the heck out of me. Then that same month, in Marvel Family number 24, continuing the theme of riffs on the concept of family, the Marvel Family versus the Fighting Yurgos from 20,000 years in the future. The Yurgos are they're not fighting Yurgos, they're farming Yurgos. They're agrarians from the year 21,948 AD, when the world has been plunged into a 70-year drought, and there's a drastic seed shortage. So the Yurgo family, a father and his son and daughter, travel back in time to try and get some seeds and maybe a little bit of water to make something grow in their future era. And it just so happens that Billy, Mary, and Freddie Freeman have gone out to a farm, and then they're helping to fix it up that weekend, and that's exactly the time and place at which these time travelers arrive. And they use their futuristic weapons to try and steal some seeds, and they lead the Marvel family a merry chase for a little bit until finally they sit down and talk it out, and the Marvel family are only too willing to barter for the seeds and help the Yurgos save their future world. In backup stories, Mary Marvel visits the Norse Valhalla. I don't remember the story specifics. I only remember it's one of the weirdest single stories I've read in my research for these episodes, and that is saying something. And in the Cap solo story of that issue, Cap and once again beautiful women are a problem for Cap. He encounters Delilah, mistress of mental suggestion, and she is she's like a raven black-haired number who inspires wolf whistles everywhere she goes. And she's kind of like a cheesecakey, good girl art bombshell of the period. And a couple of the artists at Fawcett were very good at drawing those. I believe one of them, it might have been Bud Thompson, who was like the primary artist on Captain Marvel Jr. for the second half of the Golden Age. Reportedly, he used to draw a woman named Aunt Fanny Marvel. That was her name. And she appeared in the margins of some of his artwork, wearing nothing but like a cape and boots, from what I hear. A little something to blow off steam there for Bud. But anyway, Delilah is a bit of a vamp, and she has actual telepathic powers of suggestion. And she hires her services out to certain gangsters on occasion. And one gangster hires her to get rid of Captain Marvel, and she does so by visiting Wiz Radio and planting a hypnotic suggestion in Captain Marvel's mind that he's blind. Fortunately, though, when he changes back to Billy, Billy is not so affected. He investigates further and discovers that Delilah had put this whammy on Captain Marvel. And once Captain Marvel, through Billy, knows the truth, the power of the suggestion is broken, and he's able to round up the gangsters and even bring Delilah to justice. But Cap has to watch out for those beautiful women. Captain Marvel Adventures number 87 in August of 1948. A couple of stories here. Cap fights Electron, the electron thief, who's just this like corporate fat cat financier type person who has somehow managed to corner the market on free-floating electrons, has rounded them up and made them a tradable commodity. And he's threatening to charge all broadcasters like a penny a dozen for electrons in order to broadcast. And I think like millions of electrons are used for every second of airtime. So
Yeah.
he was standing to rake in a considerable fortune until Captain Marvel goes in and opposes him. Then in a second story, Orpheus, the Greek god of music, has cut off all sound to Earth, and including Billy's ability to say Shazam, to turn into Captain Marvel. In both of these two stories, Billy or Captain Marvel is subjected to an electrical discharge of lightning level potency, and both times it's enough to transform him from one form to the other, even though he didn't say the magic word. So that's kind of a new addition to the rules of how
Yeah.
Cap's powers work. In the Electron story, Electron uses like a lightning blaster weapon on Cap that turns him back into Billy. And in the Orpheus story, when all sound is taken away from Earth and Billy can't say Shazam, he visits an atomic research plant. Now, there's atomic energy again.
Sure.
And he, at risk to his own life, puts himself into an atomic energy generator, hoping that the energy it gives off would be enough like magic lightning to make the change. And, of course, it is. And he does become Captain Marvel, and he flies off to Olympus and manages to convince Orpheus to put sound back in the world. So that's a new wrinkle introduced by a couple of different stories simultaneously
Yeah.
in that issue. Now, also in August 1948, a milestone, Whiz Comics number 100. And the title of the main story there is Captain Marvel and the 100 Horrors, in which Dr. Sivana manages to banish Captain Marvel to another planet where he fights off 100 monsters and has to fly like 100 million miles or something. The word number 100 just keeps popping up in the story multiple times. And Sivana holds a big victory party with 100 criminal guests to gloat over the fact that he's beaten Captain Marvel. But Cap comes back and beats him, of course. And there's a bit of irony in the way the story ends. Most Captain Marvel stories end with either Cap or Billy addressing the reader directly, usually through the medium of Billy giving a radio broadcast or something about the events of the story. And Captain Marvel says to the reader, "Well, folks, Billy Batson and I have been with Whiz long enough to celebrate this 100th occasion. We'll be with Whiz for at least 100 more of the same." And it's ironic because, no, they would not be with Whiz for 100 more of the same, because Whiz Comics, along with all other Fawcett comics, would end in 1953. Its last issue would actually be Whiz number 155, as we will eventually see. Marvel Family number 26. Now, this introduces another interesting antagonist for the Marvels, somebody who would keep up with them in the physical power department. He's kind of not unlike the Absorbing Man, I guess, or... his name is Jug Jasper. He's just like a common little lowlife. He's kind of scrawny, actually. He hangs out at a local pool hall when an absent-minded professor type, the kind of crackpot scientist that the Marvel comics of the 40s were full of, wanders in and expounds a theory he has about the absorption of kinetic energy, and immediately dashes back to his lab to turn it into a formula. Jug Jasper overhears what he's saying and thinks he might be able to profit by it somehow, trails the professor back to his lab, just as the professor has created a potion he could drink that would give him the ability to absorb kinetic energy and make himself stronger. Jug Jasper takes it away from the professor and drinks it himself, and thereafter, every time he's physically struck, his body swells up, he becomes stronger, and he renames himself Mr. Power. He's strutting. He wears this horizontally like orange and black striped pullover, kind of like what the Sandman wears in the Spider-Man comics of the 60s. And he picks fights with the Marvel family in the hope that he can absorb enough kinetic energy from their magically empowered blows to become as strong as they are. But the Marvel family have the wisdom of Solomon on their side, or the wisdom of Minerva in Mary's case. And they quickly figure out what he's up to. And they actually go over to visit Professor Fogg, the guy who invented the potion, and asked him to whip up an antidote. Jug Jasper realizes that they're on to him, and they chases them to the lab and tries to get them to fight him, but they... using the wisdom of Solomon again, realizing that the best way to deal with a bully like this is not to empower him by answering his challenge. There's a little bit of an allegory happening there.
Sure.
Again, ahead of its time. This is the kind of story that could probably be told nowadays when anti-bullying initiatives are so hot. Yeah. So the Marvels just kind of form a protective triangle around the professor as he works and allow Mr. Power to rain blows on them, trying to get them to fight back to feed him more power. But in the end, he just uses up the kinetic energy he's stored up and becomes just this weak little little scrawny nobody again. And the irony at the end of the story is that, as it turns out, there is no antidote for the potion that the professor came up with. And if Jug Jasper had just walked away and not continued to pummel the Marvel family and trying to get them to fight back, he could have kept his powers a little longer.
Yeah.
But instead, he was just reduced to his scrawny self and sent away to a jail cell where presumably he wouldn't be able to absorb any more kinetic energy. But again, there's another good Golden Age villain left on the table that unfortunately was never used again. Let's see. Next up is Captain Marvel Adventures number 88. Wicked Uncle Ebenezer comes back once again. And this is an example of one of those times when the Fawcett writers weren't paying that much attention to continuity and contradicted an earlier story. Last time we saw Uncle Ebenezer was when he had the uncle fight with Uncle Marvel in CMA number 53.
Right.
This time he shows up again, and Billy acts like it's the first time he's seen him since he kicked Billy out of his house. We're told that he was actually Billy's step-uncle, as opposed to his blood-uncle. I guess they thought, somebody at Fawcett thought it was too disturbing to young readers to think that Billy could be so ill-treated by a blood relative.
Sure.
He's presented as kind of a Fagin figure who tried to get Billy to steal for him. And when we see him again, he shows up in the form of a loan shark who preys on kids. Like he makes loans to children and then forces them into committing crimes to pay back what they owe. And Billy, as Captain Marvel, of course, breaks that up in a big hurry. So another visit with Uncle Ebenezer, detailing a few more of the details of the events leading up to Billy's being ejected from Uncle Ebenezer's house and becoming a street orphan. The backup story is kind of one of the backup. There were 4 stories in the average Golden Age issue of Captain Marvel Adventures. So I'm trying to whittle this down to the gems, but even so, it's taking us 3 hours to get through 3 years.
Yeah.
Crazy. But one of the backup stories was another sort of a touch of timeliness and phobias of the zeitgeist. Apparently yoga was gaining some traction in the United States back then, but was not very widely trusted. It was kind of regarded as a cult or an oriental conspiracy of some kind at first.
I can see that. Of course, now we know not, but...
Oh, no, of course not. Yeah,
I
now
can see
it's
it back then.
just meditation and good for the mind, body,
Sure.
and spirit and all of that. We understand that now, but back then it was distrusted.
Yeah.
And so we're introduced to a character named Dagar, I think. I don't remember. Dagar, Draka, it doesn't matter. A guy who was kicked out of his tiny home country of Tibruk in Asia because he was dishonest and a crook. So he came to the United States to try his luck there. So, of course, he becomes a practitioner of Zogo, which is a thinly disguised version of yoga, and gathers some followers, including Mr. Morris. And he brainwashes Mr. Morris into signing over all of his worldly goods to Draka, whatever his name was, and then jumping out a window.
Oh, jeez.
Captain Marvel saves his life, of course, and then he goes to confront the I'm just going to keep calling him Draka. What the heck? I don't remember his actual name. Draka, about what he almost certainly did to Mr. Morris to make him do this, and Draka responds by putting a whammy on Captain Marvel and mystically casting his astral self out of his body, so that his body appeared dead. Everybody thought he was dead. They had a funeral for him and everything.
Oh,
the title of the story is actually Captain Marvel's Funeral. But Captain Marvel exists as a ghost that can be seen and heard only by Draka himself. But somehow he uses his ghostly influence to get Mr. Morris to say the magic words that are needed to reunite Captain Marvel's body and spirit. Captain Marvel snaps back to life just in time to save Mr. Morris, in turn, from being killed by Draka. And then Captain Marvel punches Draka so hard that he forgets everything he ever knew about Zogo and can be packed off to a normal jail.
Wow.
See, that's just the ideal Golden Age solution to any problem. Whenever you're coming up with a problem you can't handle,
Hit him as hard as you can.
punch it until it's solvable.
Until it knocks it right out of his head.
Yeah, that seemed to have done the trick in that case.
Yeah.
And then in Marvel Family number 27, that same month, the Marvel family goes up against a villain called the Amoeba. It's another twist on family here in that it's a one-man family. It's a scientist who's also a bit of a cultural conservative and who is pessimistic about the direction the world is taking. He fears that there's not enough consensus in the world, and he decides that the solution is to increase the number of people in the world who are like-minded, and he thinks the first step is to duplicate himself many times over so that there are many more people in the world who think the way that he does, so that hopefully there can be something closer to a universal accord. So he isolates a hormone See, the DNA wasn't a widely known concept back in the 40s, so the writers of these Captain Marvel stories, when they tend to use the term hormone for in situations and contexts where a modern writer might say genetic material.
Sure.
He isolates a hormone from the amoeba that allows amoebas to replicate, perform mitosis, and he uses this to give himself the ability to self-replicate. Unfortunately, the process drives himself mad, and he decides that instead of just achieving global consensus and harmony, he just wants to conquer the world. The Marvels intervene, of course. They aren't able to defeat him outright. In the end, the different amoeba selves start quarreling among themselves. He couldn't even achieve consensus in an army consisting of one man, and they all kill each other. So there's a moral in there somewhere, I'm sure. But another example of a good quality villain that got used only once. Captain Marvel Adventures number 89. Now, this is another interesting atomic age type story in which Captain Marvel faces off against the hooded specter of fear itself. Fear is the narrator of this story, in the mode of a lot of the horror comics of the day. It starts out with you just thinking that he's this non-diegetic narrator figure. He's just there to tell the story. He's not really a part of it.
Sure.
It opens with an inventor giving an atomic engine he's just invented to a courier for delivery. The courier sees the word atomic on the package and automatically assumes he's holding a bomb, and he panics, and the rumor of an atomic bomb in the city spreads like wildfire all over the city. This as fear has his way with the populace and just cackles madly. Captain Marvel shows up on the scene and tries to talk people down out of their panic, explaining that atomic energy is not always harmful and destructive, that it's just an engine, it is not a bomb. And he actually hears fear enjoying a good laugh and confronts it. Suddenly this thing is a real presence in the story, not just the narrator. And fear explains that he exists only in the minds of people who have not known the truth. And he is able to prey on and be empowered by their ignorance. And so Captain Marvel continues to struggle desperately to explain to people that this atomic engine is for the benefit of mankind, and it's not a bomb. It's not going to blow them up. But and fear, well, in the end, the fear is defeated by understanding, and he just disappears. So it's kind of an unusual story for the time in that it confronts nuclear paranoia, not just to play into it and sort of wallow in it, encourage it in its readers, as many stories of the time tended to. It instead confronted the specter of nuclear paranoia in the interest of dispelling it and encouraging a better understanding of atomic energy and the role it really stood to play in human society. Again, that's hats off to Otto Binder, who I'm pretty sure would have been the writer of that story. And an interesting thing here in Marvel Family number 28. This is actually not the Marvel Family story, but the Mary Marvel story of that issue. Mary Marvel is informed by a friend of hers, a boy genius who has a high-powered telescope, that the meteor Ceres, which is an actual meteor, it's a giant rock in the asteroid belt in Earth's solar system, is plummeting towards Earth. Mary heads out into space as Mary Marvel to try and intercept it when she gets caught up along the way between a war between a race of cat people who live on the asteroid Vesta and a race of dog people who are invading from the asteroid Juno. They're literally fighting like cats and dogs. This is the kind of silly situation that Mary Marvel tended to get herself caught up in.
Yeah.
Now, all the while, her brother Billy is down on Earth watching the goings-on and narrating it for his radio listeners, kind of doing the play-by-play commentary and getting a little carried away with excitement for watching his sister in action. Mary is able to motion down to him, watching through the telescope, with sign language, to bring in a secret weapon that she's thought of that can help create an armistice between the dog people and the cat people. And so Billy Batson makes a trip to Animalville, which is apparently a place you can walk to on Earth S, and finds Hoppy. Gets him to speak his magic word and become Hoppy the Marvel Bunny. That's the secret weapon, because if there's one thing dogs or alien dog people want to chase more than cats or alien cat people, it's a big rabbit. So Hoppy the Marvel Bunny goes up there and lures the dog people away into the wilderness, and then beats 7 kinds of hell out of them single-handedly until they surrender. So the secret weapon works. So this it's a weird little story, but it's historically significant in that, number one, it's the only time that Hoppy the Marvel Bunny actually interacts with human members of the Marvel family in the Golden Age. Chris would be thrilled to hear that. I hope he listens to this episode.
Sure he will.
He seems to have taken a shine to Hoppy.
Yeah.
And another interesting fact, this is just about the only story in the Golden Age, and I've read just about all of them, so I'm probably right about this, in which Billy Batson appears, but never once changes into Captain Marvel. He's just there as Billy, and he's just there to cheer on his sister in action. So that's kind of an interesting little thing there.
Yeah.
And also in that issue, Cap has another brush with mythology as he fights the god Vulcan, who is summoned from the netherworld. He's really treated more as a demon than a god in this story. The owner of a metalworking plant is suffering in competition with a neighboring plant because they're doing high-quality work using high-quality materials at competitive prices. And so rather than just changing his business model, naturally the owner of this rival steel mill turns to black magic and summons up the god Vulcan to try and get him to destroy this rival metalworking plant. And Vulcan does so by building a giant robot, which Captain Marvel gets to fight, which is cool.
Heck yeah.
And in the end, Captain Marvel just uses the same book of spells to send Vulcan back to the underworld.
Yeah.
And the bad steel mill owner goes to jail, of course. All right, issue number 90 of Captain Marvel Adventures is another Mr. Tawny story. He moves into a gated community called Wildwood and suffers, it's sort of an allegory for any quote-unquote undesirable ethnicity who tries to move into a gated community like that. He faces the same kind of prejudice from the residents there. So, fill in the blank. They're talking about a Jewish person, an African-American, etc., who tried to move into a place like that. A talking tiger would doubtless run into the same biases.
Yeah.
So there's a social relevance at play there, too, satire. But it's most significant because in this story, Mr. Tawny realizes that if he's going to function in the human world, he should probably have a first name or a given name the way humans do. He's always just been Mr. Tawny. So a contest is actually thrown open to the readers of Captain Marvel Adventures to come up with a first name for Mr. Tawny. And the winner of that contest would be announced 6 months later in Captain Marvel Adventures number 96. It was a tie between Mary Garisi and Pat Laughlin, both of them from Detroit, interestingly. And they both received some kind of prize. I think it was like an autographed drawing of Captain Marvel himself.
Wow.
And Mr. Tawny. But thereafter, Mr. Tawny was known as Mr. Talky Tawny because he talks.
It's funny that both of them came up with that coincidentally.
Yeah. It's weird, and both of them from the same city, too. Who knew? And as a backup story, the third and final appearance of Mr. Atom in the Golden Age, where he goes to the future world of 2053 and conquers it. And Captain Marvel has to trail him there and dispatch him. That was in Captain Marvel Adventures number 90. That same month, Marvel Family number 29, once again, the Marvel family go up against a bad guy who bears an eerie resemblance to a future Marvel character, Carlton Clutch, the Monarch of Money, who is a crooked bad guy. He's a quote-unquote legitimate businessman who enjoys money just a little too much and is by no means above acquiring it by criminal means. But he meets his match when he tries to strong-arm Sterling Morris into selling him Whiz Radio for propaganda reasons. Mr. Morris refuses and becomes the subject of sabotage and assassination attempts by Carlton Clutch's underlings. So the Marvel family trail him back to his lair ultimately, which is decorated with a giant sign on the wall that says money is power and a little shrine to Mammon, the god of greed. And they take Carlton Clutch down. And he flees from them. He nearly escapes them when he goes into a subway station, but he realizes he doesn't have a nickel for subway fare. All he has, smallest thing he has, is a $1,000 bill. So he's undone by his own wealth and sent off to jail. But yeah, he's in certain ways pretty similar to the character that would ultimately be Marvel's Kingpin.
Okay.
Kingpin of crime. It said he's the monarch of money. And in a backup story, Cap, the world's mightiest mortal, goes mano a mano with the world's mightiest crook, who's a gangster named Duke Titano, whom Cap hits so hard in the opening scenes of the story that he actually shakes something loose in his brain, and Duke Titano develops mind-over-matter powers that he uses to conquer a small city that he rules like his own private empire until Cap shows up, punches him again so hard that he goes up out of the atmosphere and passes out from lack of oxygen. And that is apparently enough to eliminate his powers. But for a little while there, Duke Titano wore the crown of world's mightiest crook and was mighty enough to go head-to-head with Captain Marvel because he believed he was mighty enough to do it. Lots of interesting villains here that just didn't get more than a one-off shot. Yes. At the very end of 1948, we have Captain Marvel Adventures number 91, which is kind of an allegory for the incipient Cold War, as Captain Marvel has to go out into outer space and broker peace between the residents of the White Planet and the Red Planet. Guess which one are the good guy United States and which one is the Soviet Union?
Yeah, right.
But as it turns out, neither one of them is really portrayed as evil in the story. There's just big misunderstandings between the two, which Cap has to iron out. He gets to play outer space diplomat. And a couple of interesting backup stories there, too. Cap goes up against a Titan, a member of the race of ancient gods who were exiled by Zeus and his Olympians millennia ago. This is an actual mythological fact here. Cap goes up against a race of Titans who live under the water, and their king, Merman, who is known as the world's mightiest sea mortal. Merman is all upset because surface people are messing with his people's crop of oxygen plants. So Cap irons out that misunderstanding as well and makes peace with the sea titans as well. And the story of the Chameleon Stone, which is a magic rock with a lizard engraved on it, which has the power to transform into any object its wielder imagines. A really cool thing to have. And, of course, an unscrupulous criminal type gets his hands on it, and no good comes of it. He uses it to fulfill his fondest wishes, but, of course, he's undone by his own greed in the end. He tries to break it into the stone into many pieces with a hammer, so that he could have multiple things at the same time. The stone could only become one thing at once, after all. So if he wanted a fancy car, it could turn into that for him. If he wanted a mansion, it could turn into that for him, but he couldn't have them both at the same time. Okay. But when he attempted to break the stone apart, it exploded and struck him dead. And he died with a chameleon-shaped tattoo branded into his forehead. Yeah, so Captain Marvel had hardly anything to do with the story, actually. It's really just kind of like a horror fantasy short story thing that happened to have Captain Marvel in it. Yeah. But still a pretty cool tale. I'd like to have a chameleon stone. Wouldn't we all?
Yeah, wouldn't we all?
Right, so the very beginning of 1949 then, in Whiz Comics, Son of Shazam. Captain Marvel is present at or Billy maybe, or is present at the opening of an ancient urn, out of which steps a young man who claims to be the son of the sorcerer Shazam, who had been sealed away in that urn millennia ago and had now come back to do his father's good work on Earth. And he presses Captain Marvel into helping him with his seemingly benevolent designs, which actually turn out to be fronts for various crimes that are being committed. And in the end, the son of Shazam keeps summoning forth this apparition of old Shazam's spirit, who reassures Captain Marvel, "Do not be afraid of the seemingly illicit nature of my son's activities. I assure you he is doing what he is doing for a good reason. You must obey him. I command you to obey him." And, of course, the whole thing turns out to be if Captain Marvel is so bothered by the shady activities of this son of Shazam, he actually goes to the Rock of Eternity and talks to Shazam himself. And Shazam says, "Well, yes, I do have a son, but..." And then Captain Marvel flies away before he hears the rest of what Shazam has to say, assuming prematurely that this son of Shazam is on the up and up. Eventually, though, the evidence is too overwhelming that this guy is a crook, and Captain Marvel takes him down. It turns out he's really just a down-on-his-luck stage magician who came up with this son of Shazam scam to trick Captain Marvel into helping him and his criminal buddies pull some crimes. And at the very end, this is kind of a touching moment. Captain Marvel finally hears what Shazam had meant to tell him up on the Rock of Eternity, that he does have a son because Captain Marvel is his son. Oh. It's always kind of regarded Cap that way. Yeah. So, he is the son of Shazam in the title, not the crooked magician. Marvel Family number 31, that same month. It's another... More and more as we get later into the Golden Age, Marvel Family becomes just single-issue stories. It is Fawcett Publications began ramping down its page count across its publishing line. You'd get fewer 48-page comics containing 4 different stories and more just standard 32-page comics containing a single story. And this is an example of that. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it isn't. I'm misreading my notes here. Okay, yeah, Marvel, but what I just said is nonetheless true. But we'll get more and more single-issue stories and fewer multiple-story issues. But in Marvel Family number 31, Dr. Sivana uses a hunger ray to try and trigger another world war on Earth by creating widespread famine. But the Marvel family are able to trace the patterns of the pangs of hunger that are striking people on Earth. It realizes they're coming in 12-hour waves, and that they seem to correspond with the rotation of the Earth on its axis when it the hunger strikes when parts of the Earth that are facing the moon. So they track Sivana to his hideout on the moon and beat him up. And the issue ends with the Marvel family making a heartfelt plea to the people of Earth to, just the importance of peace and not allowing things like, desire for food and the shortage thereof to create disharmony on Earth. It also ends with the Marvel family taking turns spanking Sivana for being a bad boy and trying to create widespread famine on planet
I
Earth.
certainly like the spank in the book over the years.
Yeah. Just a surprising number of these stories seem to end that way. Quiet or Papa Spank. Okay. Captain Marvel backup story on that issue is basically a PSA for fire safety in the days before Smokey the Bear, where Cap fights a villain called the Fire Fiend. And, this is too strange not to mention, Captain Marvel Jr. fights a man in a squirrel suit. I'm not even talking about a squirrel-themed costume like the unbeatable Squirrel Girl wears nowadays. It's actually a head-to-toe, furry squirrel costume, making him look like a giant 6-foot-tall squirrel, complete with tool steel claws in the gloves and boots that allow him to scurry up and down buildings and trees like a real squirrel. And he uses this to commit crimes. Captain Marvel Jr. puts a stop to that. And then there was one. Yes, we're now down to one CGS co-host here in the studio, folks, as Shane had to bow out and go home to his family. It is after midnight here in the CGS studio as I record this, but I'm going to press on here. I got to get to a good stopping place in my ongoing marathon history of the Marvel family. So let's see, moving on to Captain Marvel Adventures number 94. Cap battles, Captain Marvel came up against a number of different mythological figures, real, quote-unquote real, authentic and invented in the course of his Golden Age career. Sometimes he met actual figures from world mythology, and sometimes he met gods that the writers saw fit to make up. And in CMA number 94, he meets one of the latter class of god. This would be Kull, the god of crime, not to be confused with King Kull, the Beastman, a character who will be introduced a few years later. Kull is a bad guy god who thrives on crime, as you'd expect. He looks a bit like Zeus would if he became a professional wrestler. And he lives in a cave in the underworld, like the literal underworld, not the metaphorical criminal underworld, although representatives of that metaphorical underworld do visit him in his underground lair as his worshippers and agents. And he has a gigantic crime thermometer in his little underworld cave, labeled Crime Calm, Crime Wave, Crime Tidal Wave. And apparently his great aspiration as a god is to push that thermometer up to the top. And free tote bags for everyone when he reaches his goal. But yeah, so he actually comes to the surface and takes a personal hand in helping gangs of criminals commit crimes. But Captain Marvel, as Billy, tracks him back to his lair and proves Kull's undoing in the end, of course. And as a backup story in Captain Marvel Adventures number 94, Cap is able to call a truce between two battling electrical wizards named Willard Watts and Abner Volts. Now, one of them is this fatherly, kindly, avuncular, benevolent wizard of electricity. And he is... he's the mayor of, I think it's called Sparkville, whose claim to fame is being the most electrified city in the United States. And he's like a personification of all the beneficial applications of electricity. And his arch nemesis, his opposite number, Abner Volts, is something of a misanthrope and feels that electricity is not always benevolent, and he wants to use it for personal gain and also to make a point about the hypocrisy of Willard Watts. So basically, these two are analogs for Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. And they have a little electrical war, and Captain Marvel is called in to call it to a halt. And Volts, a.k.a. Tesla, is kind of painted as the bad guy here, as history did paint him for a great many decades. It's only now that the shoe is on the other foot, and it's realized that he is not as bad, nor Edison as good as certain historical accounts rendered them. But this is kind of how the comics of 1949 saw fit to portray them. The next issue, Captain Marvel Adventures number 95, in a story called History Goes Wild. This is actually a parallel Earth story. Captain Marvel accompanies a professor into outer space to examine a mysterious object approaching Earth at a high speed. They lose track of it as they go out into space, shrug, and turn around and go back to Earth, but they find things are not quite the way they left them when they arrive. Like, for example, George Washington is president in 1949. And also, Julius Caesar is invading America, and dogs and cats are extinct. So that line from Ghostbusters, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria, that does not apply because dogs and cats are dead and people are walking around keeping armadillos and wallabies as pets. Yeah, so eventually Captain Marvel and the scientist realize that they have not landed on Earth. They have landed on that mysterious object they went out into space to examine in the first place, and it turns out that object is actually a parallel Earth that exists not in another dimension or a parallel universe separated by vibratory frequencies from our Earth, but just another identical planet whizzing through the ether. So Captain Marvel and the Professor then abscond back to their native Earth, and Captain Marvel sends the alternate Earth off on a different trajectory to orbit a distant star where no further confusion will be suffered. So there you are. It is a kind of parallel Earth story. It doesn't exactly fit very well with the Gardner-Fox model of the universe as seen in DC Comics of decades future, but close enough. Close enough for this Crisis Kid. Also, in a backup story, Cap runs up against another invented deity, in this case Ingob, the god of chance, who is in charge of all actuarial tables for the reality occupied by human beings. And he's finally catching up on a task he's been putting off, and that is coming up with the odds for the existence and efficacy of Captain Marvel. Trying to figure out the odds of Captain Marvel's success or failure in given situations, what kind of odds the average criminal has against him. So Ingob just kind of observes Captain Marvel in action as he breaks up a diamond mine, like an illicit diamond mine run by slave labor. And eventually he becomes so frustrated with Captain Marvel's abilities defying everything he thought he knew about actuarial science that this rogue god actually commits the sin of Uatu the Watcher and gets involved in his own observations and takes a hand in trying to stack the odds against Captain Marvel, but Captain Marvel still he comes out on top as he always does, and Ingob ends up in a helicopter wreck for his troubles, and we last see him up in his casino in the sky, or a House of Chance, I guess it was officially called, the House of Chance, ripping up his charts and tables, saying, what good do odds do anyone as long as Captain Marvel exists? So, another fun little tale there. The lead story in Whiz Comics number 109, Dr. Sivana, he's starting to have trouble recruiting henchmen for his criminal schemes because Captain Marvel always puts the whammy on every scheme he comes up with. So nobody wants to throw in with him anymore. So Sivana decides to recruit from his own wicked family tree by developing a ghost machine that reincarnates Sivana's most rotten ancestors in ectoplasmic form to bedevil Captain Marvel. And Captain Marvel defeats them one by one. There's a frontiersman Sivana, there's a pirate Sivana, there's a wicked knight Sivana, until finally Sivana calls up a Sivana who identifies himself as Black Sheep Sivana. He turns out to be a Puritan who despises crime, wrongdoing, and moral impurity, and he helps Captain Marvel put Sivana on ice. Yes, those Sivanas. The same month, Marvel Family number 35. Captain Marvel is duped by a criminal scientist into giving some training to the scientist's creation, Silicon Man, who's like a synthetic superhuman, or synthezoid, if you will, not unlike the original Human Torch. This Silicon Man is actually drawn by C.C. Beck. I'm pretty sure Beck himself was the artist on this story, as he was in... Well, nowhere near all the Captain Marvel stories of the Golden Age. He had a lot of assistants at his artist shop and elsewhere who did art for Captain Marvel, but he continued to keep his hand in throughout the Golden Age, and I'd be willing to bet he or his right-hand man, Pete Costanza, was responsible for the art on this story. Silicon Man was drawn as kind of a sly caricature of Tom Tyler, the actor who played Captain Marvel in the Republic serial of 1941, which C.C. Beck famously hated. So he kind of saw Tyler's Captain Marvel as like a stiff, unemotional, grim, slate-faced, rotten imitation of the real Captain Marvel appearing in Beck's comics. So when he creates this synthetic human being who has no human emotions and doesn't know or understand anything about anything and needs to be trained by Captain Marvel in the use of his Captain Marvel-like powers. See, the scientist cooked up this scheme where he sent a phony distress call from an alien planet, and Captain Marvel feels bad that he can't defend both Earth and this other planet at the same time, so the scientist presents this synthetic man, this Silicon Man, to Captain Marvel and offers him a chance to train this android to use his powers as well as Captain Marvel does, so that he can then dispatch Silicon Man to protect this fictitious alien planet, when really the scientist has in mind to use his robot for crime once Captain Marvel's trained it. But Captain Marvel trains it a little too well, and it absorbs Captain Marvel's moral code and disobeys his scientist owner. The scientist responds by flinging a special memory-erasing acid in Silicon Man's face, making it once again pliable and susceptible to the scientist's commands. He tells it to attack Captain Marvel, but unfortunately, Silicon Man has also forgotten everything Captain Marvel taught it about the use of its powers. It fights clumsily, and Captain Marvel, with regret, destroys it. Because there was a moment there when he saw a spark of genuine good in Silicon Man. Like it had learned what it truly meant to be a hero, and then its creator destroyed Silicon Man's chance to make a difference. So, good message there, in addition to the message that C.C. Beck thinks the Captain Marvel serial sucked. Next issue, Marvel Family number 36. It's the first one of those issue-length issues of Marvel Family that I mentioned. The Marvel Family battle the invaders from infinity, which are murderous living fireballs that menace the entire solar system and all life therein. Whiz Comics number 112 from August of 1949. Dr. Sivana gets booby trap happy. He sets up booby traps all over the city and holds the whole place for ransom for saying that he will not reveal his secret list of booby traps until he has delivered Billy Batson bound and gagged and ready for a ritual killing. And the irony there is that Sivana only set up a few booby traps around town, enough to get people worried, and then just panic and mob mentality takes over from there, and people, every time a little thing goes wrong in their lives, they assume, it's a Sivana booby trap. And so it's a story that contains a valuable lesson about fear, security, and mob mentality. It's a good lesson for the somewhat unsettled post-war United States as we move into the 50s and the Cold War, and paranoia and conformist tendencies tended to be running rampant. And, but it's touching, though. It casts mob mentality in a surprisingly positive light, perhaps an unrealistically positive light. And the tagline for the story at the end is when Billy announces to the reader that crime is the world's biggest booby trap, and Sivana falls right in. Which brings us to Captain Marvel Adventures number 100, published in September of 1949. Now, this is a big story. It's a complete in 4 chapters. It's a full-length, 48-page story. And, not 48 full pages, but, there are other pages given up to like humor strips. All these Fawcett comics of the Golden Age, in addition to the superhero stories, also had little humor strips thrown in. So it's not a full 48 pages long, but darn near. So it's a centennial celebration story called Captain Marvel Battles the Plot Against the Universe. This is a humdinger of a story, folks. It goes in a lot of interesting different directions. The plot against the universe is, of course, Dr. Sivana's. It begins innocently enough. It begins with Captain Marvel hanging out with Mr. Tawny, and Mr. Tawny wondering about Captain Marvel's origin. And Captain Marvel decides he trusts Mr. Tawny enough to tell him the details, and he actually takes Mr. Tawny down to the subterranean chamber where Cap and or Billy always go to communicate with old SHAZAM. Go down there to his chamber, light his magic brazier, and his spirit appears. And so Mr. Tawny gets to meet SHAZAM for the first time. Not long after that, though, Sivana has the bright idea to try and attack Billy / Captain Marvel through the source of their powers, old SHAZAM himself, and he has the further bright idea to attack Mr. Tawny, just sort of get to the weak link in the Marvel chain, as it were, since he's one of the newest members of the supporting cast, and see if Mr. Tawny knows anything about Captain Marvel or SHAZAM's background that he could share. And he gets hold of Mr. Tawny and hypnotizes him into showing Sivana where the magic cavern is. And so the two of them then go back in time. This is Sivana tries this stratagem multiple times, and it never works. It always blows up in his face. So they go back in time to witness Captain Marvel's origin, just to fill some pages. But Mr. Tawny managed to break free of Sivana's control and thwarts him there, and Sivana and Mr. Tawny return to the present, but Sivana has learned just enough that he is able to find a way to the Rock of Eternity. I think he does so by disguising himself as Billy Batson, actually, and questioning old SHAZAM, which is a little bit creepy. But he finds a way to get to the Rock of Eternity and seizes control of it. Now, in the course of this story, we're introduced to 3 different miracle metals. Always an interesting part of superhero lore, the magic metals that we're introduced to, from adamantium to kryptonite. But 3 of them show up here. One of them is a metal called shazamium, and we're told in this story that the reason old SHAZAM is able to remain semi-tangible in spirit form, the way he's able to continue to exist both on the mortal plane and on the Rock of Eternity without passing on into the spirit world, is because he wears a magic bracelet made of shazamium. Sivana steals this bracelet from SHAZAM and basically holds SHAZAM's life ransom, and therefore holds Captain Marvel in his thrall. So, the first thing he has Captain Marvel do, once he's made it clear to Captain Marvel that he must do what Sivana says or SHAZAM's life is forfeit, he puts Captain Marvel to work working with another miracle metal called Sivanium, of Sivana's own invention. It's a living metal that can be used to create living robots. And he puts Captain Marvel to work manufacturing Sivana robots, or as I like to call them, Sivandroids, to make a world-conquering army. So Captain Marvel toes the line to a point until the wisdom of Solomon gives him an idea to get himself out of this situation. Working in the lab in which Sivana sets him up, in addition to making wicked Sivana robots, he also creates one good Captain Marvel robot that will help him in the scheme that he has in mind. And he also creates a new element called Marvelium, the world's mightiest metal. So he then finds his way to the Rock of Eternity and disguises himself as a Sivandroid, since Sivana disguised himself as Billy earlier in the story. Turnabout is fair play, I suppose. And he tricks Sivana into a prison that Captain Marvel has constructed made of Marvelium. Sivana, since he has this magic Shazamium bracelet that he stole from SHAZAM, he is able to manifest in spirit form so that Captain Marvel can't just solve his problem. He can't punch his way out of the situation, in other words, has to use his brains. But Marvelium is able to entrap Sivana, even in spirit form. Cap is able to get back the Marvelium bracelet and save old SHAZAM's life. If SHAZAM had been without that bracelet for much longer, he would have dissipated and passed over into the spirit world permanently, and he would have been unable to bestow his powers on Captain Marvel, so Captain Marvel would have been no more. So it was indeed it's quite the plot against the universe that Sivana had managed to hatch by that one act of petty theft, stealing that bracelet. And the story takes a lot of unnecessary twists and turns, but it's very entertaining, and it's a great example of the occasionally Byzantine nature of Golden Age superhero storytelling at its best and most skillfully crafted. So it's a recommended read. Right. And then in the next month, Marvel Family number 40, another issue-length story. The Marvels actually don't go up against Dr. Sivana for a change. The Marvels decide to put on a 7 Wonders of the Modern World exhibition to promote world peace. Representatives from each of the 6 major continents and the polar regions, meaning Inuits in this case, were going to contribute exhibits. Meanwhile, though, they're opposed by the crypto-fascist figure known as Rex, who's the leader of a secret empire. He's got agents in just about every world government. But the Marvel Family and their 7 Wonders of the World exhibition are a threat to him, apparently, so he pours all his resources into thwarting this silly exhibition instead of, trying to amass more world power and doing things that matter. He's doing that. And anyway, he's another example of a character that makes only one appearance in the Golden Age. The Marvel Family, once they expose him, he's actually thwarted by one of his own agents who's had his fill of working for Rex when Rex threatens this agent's daughter. So he turns on Rex, and he enables the Marvel Family to take Rex down and disperse his empire. So there. Captain Marvel Adventures number 102. A few halfway interesting stories happening here. In the lead story, Captain Marvel versus the World Destroyer. The World Destroyer turns out to be a benevolent scientist who is trying to end all life on Earth as a form of mass euthanasia because he has seen through his telescope that a gigantic cloud of poisonous black space gas is approaching Earth. And he sees euthanizing the entire population of Earth as preferable to their dying a slow, horrible death by asphyxiation in this space cloud. Cap, however, has alternatives to planetary genocide, and he discovers that the space cloud contains flammable elements, and he takes a giant matchstick out there and just burns it all up before it gets to Earth, and everybody's happy. Second story, Captain Marvel goes up against the Man Who Doesn't Exist, who is actually a man named... I think it's Timothy Tinker, who is just this unpleasant little nebbish who runs a second-hand goods store. He's unpleasant in personality. He says, bah, and grumbles at everybody he meets. He hates everyone, and everyone hates him, until one day he's had enough, and he climbs inside the rear end of a large mechanical man suit he's built. The image of him climbing inside the derriere of a mechanical man is a little disturbing. And he goes on a rampage as Bull Barton. And Captain Marvel is ultimately able to defeat him, and it's revealed that Bull Barton is the titular Man Who Doesn't Exist. In the third story in that issue, Captain Marvel is confronted by an ancient black magician named Afrit Ugla. A modern-day college professor buys an old spell book in a second-hand bookstore and wanders around the city chuckling to himself as he reads magic spell after magic spell out loud, just enjoying a private laugh over anybody ever believing that this nonsense was true. Meanwhile, all unawares that every spell he recites aloud has horrifying supernatural consequences which Captain Marvel has to clean up. And the last spell the professor utters releases the author of this spell book, the magician Afrit Ugla, into the world, and Captain Marvel is then forced to deal with him. And all the while, the professor remains completely humorously unaware of the consequences of his actions. But Captain Marvel does a number on Afrit Ugla, though. He just scares him clear back to the netherworld. In the end, Ugla himself utters the magic spell that banishes him back to the netherworld just to get himself away from Captain Marvel. And in the final story, it's kind of a Secret Life of Walter Mitty thing, starring Mr. Tawny, as he goes on a kind of ride-along on a rescue mission with Captain Marvel, keeps slipping into daydreams, each one more fantastic than the last, of what it will be like when he and Captain Marvel finally arrive at the site of the rescue mission that they're going on, only to discover that the reality of the rescue mission is more fantastic than any of his daydreams, i.e., there are actually aliens present trying to abduct a young girl and her father. And Mr. Tawny is very brave in battle against these aliens because he's convinced he's still daydreaming. And when he's finally convinced that he's been awake the whole time, he faints dead away. Oh, Mr. Tawny. And let's see. That same month in Whiz Comics number 115, Captain Marvel halts the marine invasion of one Jasper Jode, a modern-day man without a country who's committed so many crimes and acts of treason in different countries all over the world that he can't set foot on dry land anywhere. He's cursed to sail around in the ocean in a homemade submarine. Fortunately for him, though, he's somehow developed the power to send out mental waves that give him control over sea creatures. Now, does that sound like certain trademarked characters published by rival publishers of Fawcett back in the 40s? One or two of them that might have had the power to control sea creatures? Yep, I'm pretty sure that's who this guy was supposed to be an analog for. He called himself King Neptune, and he had an army of squid and giant sea turtles and giant lobsters and things. And Captain Marvel ultimately solves the problem by grabbing an electric eel and forcing it to bite both of Jasper Jode's ears, thereby shorting out his mental powers and leaving him the victim of his own army of sea critters. So there is that. And now I think we're going to make this the concluding tale in this installment of the Spotlight on Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel Adventures number 103, December of 1949, which presents us with what might be the tallest Captain Marvel tale yet. Captain Marvel travels to the year 1 million AD. It's not the first trip he's made to that era either. There's something about the round number of 1 million AD that comic book writers seem to like as a far-flung futuristic locale. He goes there, or then, and discovers that Earth is a barren, frozen, dead planet. And he takes it upon himself to restore life to Earth. He reignites the sun, which has been dead for centuries. And then he summons back the descendants of human colonists who have scattered to the far corners of the universe to come back and repopulate the Earth these many eons hence. So Captain Marvel becomes the single-handed savior of the dead planet Earth. A little bit messianic, but it just shows how far hyperbole can get you in a wonderful medium like comic books. And it is there that I believe we're going to call a halt to this third installment of Captain Marvel in the Golden Age. But I swore, as we were setting out, that if we couldn't get to the end of Cap's actual Golden Age in this episode, one way or another, this would be the final installment of the Spotlight on Captain of SHAZAM in the Golden Age. How? Because the remainder of Cap's Golden Age will be covered in an episode entitled Spotlight on Captain Marvel in the Atomic Age. That's right. We will start in again in our next episode with the beginning of 1950, and we will see what becomes of Captain Marvel, his Marvel family, and the entire Fawcett Comics line as we slide into the last few years of their existence and some unfortunate changes they do go through, you will see. All right, so I hope you will all join us again for that when we get around to recording it. Hopefully I can keep my fellow Marvel family members here in the studio with me until the end of that episode. It's going to be kind of a fun one, and I'm hoping I'll get Chris to chime in with some of his real-world historical knowledge, too. But for now, let's just say the magic word and teleport ourselves back to the Rock of Eternity or something. Just choose your own Marvel family metaphor here. I'm tired. Okay, but before I go, I'd like to give another vote of thanks to the sponsor for this episode, which was, again, the Collection Drawer Company, maker of the wonderful Drawer Box storage solution. It's a comic book storage box with a pull-out drawer so you can store your comics on the bottom of a pile and still access them without moving everything around. Go to collectiondrawer.com for more details. Tell them Comic Geek Speak sent you. If you'd like to send us an email here at Comic Geek Speak, the address to send it to is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. If you'd like to leave a voicemail, you can call 267-702-6642. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ComicGeekSpeak. We encourage everyone to stop by thecomicforums.vanillaforums.com to check out our community of Comic Geek Speak listeners and indulge in some comics-related discussions with your fellow fans, and also leave feedback on this and many other episodes of CGS. Let you know what you think of my attempt at providing a comprehensive history of Captain Marvel in the Golden Age here. If I'm overdoing it, please let me know, because sometimes I wonder. We'd like to give some thanks to everybody who's donated to the show in the past. We really appreciate it. Couldn't have done the show without you. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was talking about it going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything that geeks love. From cakes and laser beams, opinions like the